The emperor's conception of what would become the Golden Throne emerged from a convergence of necessity and foresight that predated even the earliest campaigns of the Great Crusade. As his psychic awareness expanded across the galaxy during the latter stages of the Age of Strife, the master of mankind witnessed firsthand the catastrophic consequences of uncontrolled psychic manifestations. Entire worlds had been consumed by demonic incursions triggered by untrained psychics, their populations either slaughtered or transformed into twisted abominations. The Emperor understood that humanity's evolutionary path toward becoming a psychic species was irreversible, yet without proper guidance and protection, this transformation would inevitably lead to extinction. During the early planning phases of the Great Crusade in the 30th millennium, the Emperor began formulating a comprehensive strategy to address humanity's psychic awakening. His vision extended far beyond the immediate goals of reuniting the scattered human colonies. He foresaw a future where billions of latent psychers would manifest across the galaxy simultaneously, creating a psychic maelstrom that would dwarf even the most devastating warp storms of the Age of Strife. The solution required a device capable of channeling and controlling psychic energy on an unprecedented scale, something that could serve as both beacon and barrier between real space and the warp. The Emperor's initial designs drew heavily upon his millennia of accumulated knowledge regarding ancient Terran archaeotech. Deep within the archives of his personal vaults lay fragments of technology that predated even the Dark Age of technology, relics from humanity's earliest forays into psychic manipulation and warp travel. Among these artifacts were crystalline matrices capable of storing and redirecting psychic energy, quantum processors that could calculate probability streams across multiple dimensional planes, and neural interface systems that allowed direct mental communion with machine spirits of extraordinary complexity. The most significant archaeological discovery occurred during excavations beneath the Himalayan mountains, where construction crews unearthed a massive Dark Age of technology facility that had remained sealed for over 15,000 years. The complex contained manufacturing equipment for psychic resonance amplifiers, along with detailed technical specifications for devices that could theoretically sustain a human consciousness within a mechanical framework indefinitely. These discoveries provided the Emperor with the foundational technology necessary to transform his theoretical designs into practical reality. The facility's data banks revealed that Dark Age scientists had been experimenting with similar concepts, attempting to create a permanent psychic lighthouse that could guide humanity's expansion into the galaxy. Their efforts had been abandoned when the Men of Iron Rebellion began, but their research notes contained invaluable insights into the challenges of maintaining psychic stability within technological matrices. The Emperor incorporated these lessons into his own designs, recognizing that the ancient scientists' failures stemmed from their inability to provide a sufficiently powerful psychic source to sustain their creations. Recognizing that the construction of such a device exceeded even his considerable capabilities, the Emperor initiated negotiations with the Mechanicum of Mars during the early stages of the Great Crusade. The tech priests possessed manufacturing capabilities and technical expertise that complemented his own knowledge perfectly. Their mastery of ancient standard template construct patterns, combined with their religious devotion to the Omnissiah, made them ideal partners for a project of such magnitude and secrecy. The initial collaboration began with the Emperor sharing carefully selected portions of his archaeological discoveries with senior Magos representatives. Fabricator General Kelber personally oversaw the analysis of the Dark Age technology, his augmented consciousness interfacing directly with the ancient data cores to extract their deepest secrets. The tech priests were astounded by the sophistication of the psychic manipulation systems, recognizing technologies that surpassed even their most advanced creations. Construction of the preliminary infrastructure began in the deepest sublevels of the Imperial Palace, far beneath the throne room that would eventually house the completed device. Mechanicum construction servitors, heavily modified for work in psychically active environments, carved vast chambers from the living rock of the Himalayan mountains. The excavation process required extreme precision, as the emperor had identified specific geological formations that would enhance the throne's psychic resonance capabilities. The foundational framework incorporated a fusion of archaeotech and mechanicum engineering that pushed both technologies to their absolute limits. Quantum crystalline matrices, grown in zero-gravity foundries aboard mechanicum-forged ships, were embedded within adamantium support structures that had been blessed by the emperor himself. Each crystal required individual calibration to resonate at specific psychic frequencies, a process that took tech priests months to complete for even the smallest components. The neural interface systems presented the greatest technical challenge. The emperor required a connection method that would allow him to maintain conscious control over the device while simultaneously channeling the full extent of his psychic abilities. The ancient Dark Age designs provided a starting point, but their neural pathways were designed for baseline humans rather than a being of the Emperor's extraordinary capabilities. Magos biologist specialists worked alongside the Emperor to develop new interface protocols that could accommodate his unique physiology without causing catastrophic feedback loops. Early prototype testing began in heavily shielded chambers located 7 kilometers beneath the Imperial Palace. These initial tests used scaled-down versions of the primary systems, powered by psychic batteries rather than direct neural interface. The prototypes demonstrated the basic feasibility of the Emperor's designs, successfully channeling and redirecting psychic energy in controlled patterns. However, they also revealed significant stability issues that would require extensive refinement before full-scale implementation could proceed. The first prototype capable of sustaining a living occupant was completed during the latter stages of the Great Crusade's initial expansion phase. This device, roughly 1/10 the size of the intended final version, incorporated all the major systems in miniaturized form. The Emperor conducted the initial test personally, his consciousness interfacing with the machine's neural networks for a period of several hours. The experience provided him with crucial insights into the psychological effects of extended connection with the device, revealing that maintaining awareness while channeling such massive psychic energies would require unprecedented mental discipline. Subsequent prototypes focused on refining the life support systems necessary to sustain a human occupant indefinitely. The Emperor's physiology differed significantly from baseline humanity, but he recognized that future operators might not possess his regenerative capabilities. The life support systems incorporated advanced medical technology recovered from Dark Age medical facilities, including cellular regeneration matrices and neural preservation systems that could maintain brain function even under extreme stress conditions. The testing phases revealed several critical design flaws that required fundamental modifications to the core architecture. The initial psychic focusing arrays proved insufficient for channeling the full spectrum of warp energies, leading to dangerous resonance cascades that threatened to tear holes in real space itself. The Emperor worked directly with mechanicum specialists to develop new focusing systems based on crystalline structures that mimicked the psychic resonance patterns of his own neural pathways. Power distribution presented another significant challenge. The device required energy inputs that exceeded the output of entire Forge worlds, yet the power flow had to remain perfectly stable to prevent catastrophic system failures. The solution involved creating a hybrid power system that drew energy from multiple sources simultaneously: conventional plasma reactors, psychic energy converters, and direct neural interface with the occupant's life force. This multi-layered approach provided the necessary redundancy to ensure continuous operation even if individual power sources failed. The Emperor's foresight regarding the device's ultimate purpose influenced every aspect of its design. He understood that the Golden Throne would eventually need to serve functions far beyond its original conception as a psychic beacon. The modular architecture allowed for future modifications and upgrades, while the core systems were designed to interface with other major Imperial technologies that had not yet been constructed. This forward-thinking approach would prove crucial when the device's role expanded to include maintaining the Astronomican and serving as the Emperor's life support system following the events of the Horus Heresy. By the time the Great Crusade reached its zenith, the foundational work on the Golden Throne was essentially complete. The device existed in a state of readiness, its systems tested and calibrated, awaiting only the Emperor's decision to activate its full capabilities. The knowledge that such a device existed provided him with confidence that humanity could survive the psychic awakening that he knew was inevitable, even as he continued to hope that more optimal solutions might yet be discovered through the prosecution of the Great Crusade and the eventual completion of his secret project within the Imperial Webway. The Emperor's encounter with the Eldar Webway fundamentally altered his vision for humanity's future, transforming the Golden Throne from a psychic beacon into the cornerstone of an entirely new phase of human evolution. During the earliest stages of the Great Crusade, Imperial forces discovered abandoned Eldar installations across multiple worlds, their crystalline structures and wraithbone architecture clearly the product of advanced Xenos technology. Initial Mechanicum analysis revealed that these structures were connected to a vast network of tunnels that existed outside normal space-time, allowing instantaneous travel across galactic distances without exposure to the predators and storms of the warp. The breakthrough came when Expedition Fleet 63 encountered an intact Eldar craftworld drifting in the Segmentum Solar's outer reaches. The craftworld's inhabitants had long since departed, leaving behind only automated defense systems and vast archives of technical data. The Emperor personally led the exploration of the vessel's core systems, his psychic abilities allowing him to interface directly with the craftworld's spirit stones and access information that would have remained sealed to lesser minds. Within the crystalline matrices of the craftworld's navigation chamber, he discovered detailed schematics of the Webway's construction principles and operational parameters. The Webway represented a solution to humanity's greatest strategic vulnerability. Every Imperial vessel traveling through the warp faced constant danger from demonic entities, temporal distortions, and the unpredictable nature of warp storms that could delay or destroy entire fleets. The Eldar tunnel network bypassed these hazards entirely, existing in a pocket dimension that remained isolated from the Chaos God's influence. More significantly, the Webway's architecture suggested that it could be expanded and modified, potentially allowing humanity to create new passages tailored to Imperial needs rather than relying on ancient Eldar constructions. The Emperor's analysis revealed that the Webway operated through a combination of psychic manipulation and dimensional engineering that exceeded even Dark Age of technology capabilities. The tunnel walls were composed of crystallized psychic energy, held in stable configuration by massive anchor points that existed simultaneously in real space and the warp. These anchor points required constant maintenance by powerful psychers, explaining why the network had begun deteriorating following the fall of the Eldar. The Emperor realized that with sufficient psychic power and technical expertise, humanity could not only maintain existing Webway passages, but construct entirely new sections of the network. The strategic implications were staggering. Imperial fleets could traverse the galaxy in days rather than months, arriving at their destinations with perfect timing and coordination. The Great Crusade's expansion rate would increase exponentially, allowing simultaneous campaigns across multiple sectors without the communication delays that plagued current operations. Perhaps most importantly, human colonists could travel to new worlds without risking corruption by warp exposure, ensuring that the populations of newly established colonies remain genetically and spiritually pure. Construction of humanity's first Webway gate began in the deepest levels of the Imperial Palace, utilizing chambers that had been excavated during the Golden Throne's initial construction phases. The Emperor selected this location not merely for security reasons, but because the palace's position atop the Himalaysian mountains provided optimal psychic resonance conditions for dimensional manipulation. The mountain's natural mineral composition, combined with the psychic saturation created by the Emperor's presence, created an environment where the barriers between dimensions were naturally thinner. The gate's construction required technologies that pushed both Imperial and Mechanicum capabilities to their absolute limits. The primary framework consisted of wraithbone structures grown using techniques reverse engineered from captured Eldar installations, but modified to resonate with human psychic frequencies rather than Eldar soul patterns. Mechanicum tech priests spent months learning to cultivate the psychically active material, their augmented consciousness struggling to comprehend the organic nature of technology that grew rather than being assembled from discrete components. The dimensional anchor points presented the greatest engineering challenge. Each anchor required a crystalline matrix capable of existing simultaneously in multiple dimensional states, held in position by gravitic field generators that operated on principles barely understood by Imperial science. The Emperor worked directly with Magos Dominus Lucas Chrome to develop the necessary containment systems, his psychic abilities providing insights into dimensional mechanics that purely technological analysis could never achieve. The resulting anchor points resembled massive geometric sculptures of impossible complexity, their surfaces shifting between different crystalline configurations as they maintained their grip on the fabric of space-time itself. Integration with the Golden Throne required extensive modifications to the device's original architecture. The throne's psychic focusing arrays were reconfigured to channel energy not only into the Astronomican beacon, but also into the Webway Gate's dimensional stabilizers. This dual-purpose design meant that the throne's operator would simultaneously maintain humanity's primary navigation beacon while controlling access to the Webway network. The modifications added layers of complexity that increased the psychic burden on the operator exponentially, requiring mental discipline and power that exceeded the capabilities of any psyker save the Emperor himself. The power requirements for maintaining an active Webway Gate dwarfed even the Golden Throne's considerable energy demands. The dimensional anchors consumed vast amounts of psychic energy to maintain their stability, while the gate itself required constant reinforcement to prevent collapse under the stresses of interdimensional travel. The Emperor designed additional power coupling systems that could draw energy from the palace's plasma reactors, but the primary power source remained the psychic abilities of the throne's operator. This dependency meant that any interruption in the operator's concentration could result in catastrophic dimensional instabilities that might tear open permanent rifts between real space and the warp. Testing of the gate's basic functionality began with small-scale experiments using automated probes. These initial tests demonstrated that the gate could successfully open passages into the existing Webway network, allowing Imperial devices to travel through Eldar-constructed tunnels and emerge at predetermined coordinates. The probes returned with detailed sensor readings of the Webway's internal structure, revealing a network of breathtaking complexity that spanned the entire galaxy. Thousands of major arteries connected hundreds of thousands of smaller passages, creating a transportation infrastructure that surpassed anything humanity had ever conceived. The Emperor's long-term vision extended far beyond simply accessing existing Eldar passages. He intended to construct an entirely human section of the Webway, with Terra serving as the central hub for a network that would eventually connect every major Imperial world. This human Webway would be designed specifically for Imperial needs, with passage dimensions optimized for Imperial vessel configurations and security systems tailored to defend against specifically human threats. The construction of such a network would require decades of continuous effort, but the strategic advantages would fundamentally alter the balance of power in the galaxy. Control of Webway access points across the galaxy became a critical objective for Great Crusade planning. Imperial forces began prioritizing the capture of worlds containing Eldar ruins, particularly those sites that showed evidence of Webway portal construction. These locations were designated as high-priority targets, with specialized Mechanicum teams assigned to analyze and potentially reactivate dormant portal systems. The successful capture of even a single functional Webway gate could provide Imperial forces with unprecedented strategic mobility within an entire sector. The First Legion received specific instructions to secure webway-related sites during their campaigns in the Galactic North. Lyon L. Johnson's forces encountered several intact Eldar installations on worlds within the Thramas sector, their dark stone pyramids containing portal chambers that had remained sealed for millennia. The Lyon's methodical approach to warfare proved ideal for securing these sensitive sites, his tactical acumen ensuring that the delicate Eldar technology remained undamaged during the conquest process. Each captured installation was immediately secured by Mechanicum specialists and connected to the growing network of Imperial Webway research facilities. The 7th Legion's campaigns in the Segmentum Solar uncovered evidence of a massive Eldar Webway hub on the world of Inwit, buried beneath kilometers of ice and rock. Rogel Dorn's expertise in siege warfare and fortification proved invaluable in excavating the site without triggering the automated defense systems that had protected it for thousands of years. The Inwit installation contained manufacturing equipment for Wraithbone construction, providing Imperial forces with their first opportunity to study Eldar production techniques in detail. The knowledge gained from this site accelerated the development of human webway technology by centuries. Magnus the Red's role in the Webway project represented the culmination of the Emperor's plans for humanity's psychic evolution. The Primarch of the 15th Legion possessed psychic abilities that exceeded those of any other being save the Emperor himself, combined with an intellectual curiosity and theoretical understanding that made him uniquely qualified to operate the Golden Throne's complex systems. The Emperor's intention was for Magnus to serve as the permanent operator of the Golden Throne once the Great Crusade concluded, allowing the Master of Mankind to pursue other aspects of his grand design for humanity's future. Magnus's education in the Webway's operational principles began during his early years on Prospero, where the Emperor provided him with extensive theoretical training in dimensional mechanics and psychic manipulation. The Crimson King's natural affinity for sorcery made him an ideal student for such esoteric knowledge, his mind capable of grasping concepts that would have driven lesser psychers to madness. Magnus learned to perceive the dimensional barriers that separated real space from the warp, developing techniques for manipulating these barriers without causing dangerous instabilities. The practical training phases took place within the Imperial Palace itself, where Magnus worked directly with the Golden Throne systems under the Emperor's supervision. These sessions revealed the true scope of the psychic burden that the throne's operator would bear. Maintaining the Astronomican beacon required constant concentration and enormous psychic output, while simultaneously controlling the Webway gate demanded split-second timing and precise dimensional calculations. The combination of these responsibilities would have overwhelmed any normal psyker within minutes, but Magnus demonstrated the capability to maintain both functions for extended periods without apparent strain. Magnus's understanding of the Webway project's strategic importance grew as he gained access to the Emperor's long-term plans for human expansion. The Crimson King recognized that control of the Webway network would allow humanity to achieve a level of galactic dominance that surpassed even the ancient Eldar Empire at its height. Human colonies could be established and supplied without risking warp travel, while Imperial military forces could respond to threats with unprecedented speed and coordination. The psychological impact on enemy forces would be equally significant, as humanity's apparent ability to appear anywhere in the galaxy without warning would create a climate of fear and uncertainty among potential adversaries. The Emperor's vision encompassed not merely military applications, but the fundamental transformation of human civilization itself. The Webway would allow the establishment of specialized worlds dedicated to specific functions within the Imperial economy. Manufacturing worlds could focus entirely on production without requiring defensive capabilities, knowing that Imperial fleets could arrive within hours if threatened. Research facilities could be established in complete isolation, their locations known only to the highest levels of Imperial command. The efficiency gains from such specialization would accelerate human technological development at an unprecedented rate. The integration of psyker training with webway operations represented another crucial aspect of the Emperor's plans. Magnus would oversee the development of specialized psyker cadres trained specifically in dimensional manipulation and webway maintenance. These psykers would serve as operators for smaller webway gates established on major Imperial worlds, creating a network of psychically gifted individuals capable of maintaining the entire system. The training programs would also serve as a means of identifying and developing the most powerful human psykers, ensuring that humanity's psychic evolution proceeded along controlled and beneficial paths. The Emperor's carefully orchestrated plans for humanity's ascension through the Webway Project faced their first catastrophic test when Magnus the Red received his prophetic vision of Horus's corruption on Davin. The Crimson King's psychic abilities, honed through decades of training in dimensional manipulation and warp theory, allowed him to perceive the exact moment when the War Master's soul was claimed by the Chaos Gods. The vision struck Magnus with the force of a collapsing star, showing him images of betrayal, civil war, and the systematic destruction of everything the Great Crusade had achieved. Horus stood at the center of this apocalyptic future, his form twisted by demonic influence as he led half the legions Astartes against their own father. Magnus understood immediately that conventional communication methods would be insufficient to convey the urgency of this revelation. Standard astropathic channels were too slow and unreliable for such critical intelligence, while the risks of interception by hostile forces made traditional message transmission impossible. The Crimson King's training in webway operations had familiarized him with the dimensional barriers that separated real space from the warp, knowledge that suggested an alternative approach to reaching the Emperor. Magnus could project his consciousness directly through the warp to Terra, bypassing the normal limitations of psychic communication through sheer force of will and psychic power. The ritual Magnus performed on Prospero drew upon sorcerous techniques that the Emperor had explicitly forbidden, methods that the Crimson King had secretly continued to study despite the Council of Nicaea's prohibitions. Magnus assembled his most trusted sorcerers within the pyramid of Phodop's central chamber, their combined psychic abilities focused through crystalline amplifiers that had been constructed using principles derived from Eldar technology. The ritual required precise calculations of dimensional coordinates and warp current flows, mathematical formulations that pushed even Magnus's considerable intellect to its limits. The psychic energies Magnus unleashed to breach the dimensional barriers between Prospero and Terra exceeded anything previously attempted by human psykers. His consciousness, amplified by the ritual circle and driven by desperate urgency, tore through the warp like a spear of pure thought. The force required to maintain coherent communication across such vast distances while penetrating the psychic defenses surrounding the Imperial Palace created ripples in the warp that could be detected by entities across multiple star systems. Magnus's psychic signature blazed like a beacon in the Immaterium, announcing his presence to every demon prince and chaos entity within 100 light years of his position. The Emperor was deep in communion with the Golden Throne systems when Magnus's psychic projection reached Terra. The master of mankind's consciousness was simultaneously maintaining the Astronomican beacon and monitoring the delicate dimensional equilibrium of the Webway Gate when the Crimson King's warning struck the palace's psychic defenses with the force of a battleship's bombardment. The carefully calibrated psychic wards that protected the Webway Gate from warp intrusion were designed to deflect gradual pressure and minor incursions, not the concentrated assault of a Primarch's full psychic might focused into a single devastating blow. The protective barriers that had taken decades to construct and calibrate shattered in an instant. Crystalline matrices that had been grown using techniques reverse-engineered from Eldar technology cracked under the psychic overload, their geometric patterns collapsing as the dimensional anchors lost their grip on the fabric of space-time. The Webway Gate stabilization systems, designed to maintain perfect equilibrium between real space and the tunnel network, began fluctuating wildly as uncontrolled warp energy poured through the breached defenses. Warning klaxons echoed through the palace's deepest levels as Mechanicum technicians struggled to comprehend the cascade of system failures that were occurring simultaneously across multiple technological domains. The breach in the webway gate's defenses created a dimensional wound that extended far beyond the immediate vicinity of the Imperial Palace. The tear in reality allowed the raw stuff of the warp to pour directly into the webway's carefully maintained pocket dimension, contaminating tunnel networks that had remained pure for millions of years. Eldar constructed passages that had never experienced demonic intrusion suddenly found themselves flooded with chaos entities that materialized from the bleeding wound in dimensional space. The contamination spread along the webway's arterial networks like a plague, infecting connection points and junction chambers across vast distances. Demonic entities of unprecedented power began manifesting within the Imperial Palace itself. Lesser demons materialized in the lower levels where the webway gate was housed, their forms coalescing from the psychic energy that continued to leak through the damaged dimensional barriers. These creatures were not the relatively weak manifestations that occasionally appeared during minor warp storms, but fully realized entities that possessed the strength and intelligence to pose genuine threats to even Space Marine defenders. Bloodletters of Khorne wielded brass swords that could cleave through ceramite armor, while pink horrors of Tzeentch unleashed cascades of warp fire that ignited everything they touched. The Emperor's immediate response required him to abandon his carefully planned schedule for the Great Crusade's final phases. The dimensional breach demanded his constant attention to prevent it from expanding into a permanent rift that could consume Terra itself. The Master of Mankind was forced to commit his full psychic might to containing the demonic incursion, his consciousness locked in perpetual battle with entities that sought to pour through the breach in ever-increasing numbers. The Golden Throne systems, originally designed to channel the Emperor's abilities toward maintaining the Astronomican and controlling webway access, were hastily reconfigured to focus his power on dimensional stabilization and demon banishment. The strain of maintaining the containment effort while simultaneously preserving the Astronomican beacon pushed even the Emperor's vast capabilities to their limits. The psychic burden of fighting a constant battle against demonic intrusion while keeping humanity's primary navigation beacon operational required levels of concentration and energy expenditure that could not be sustained indefinitely. The Emperor's physical form, seated upon the Golden Throne, began showing signs of the enormous stress he was enduring. His features, normally composed and serene, were drawn with the effort of maintaining multiple psychic disciplines simultaneously. Custodian guard units throughout the Imperial Palace were mobilized to establish defensive perimeters around the areas where demonic manifestations were most frequent. These elite warriors, equipped with guardian spears and storm shields, engaged the chaos entities in brutal close-quarters combat within the palace's corridors and chambers. The custodians' training in combating psychic threats proved invaluable as they coordinated their attacks to disrupt the demon's manifestation patterns. Captain General Constantin Valdor personally led the most dangerous missions into the deepest levels, where the concentration of warp energy made demon manifestation almost continuous. The breach's effects extended beyond the immediate demonic incursion to threaten the entire webway network's structural integrity. The dimensional wound acted as a drain on the psychic energies that maintained the tunnel system's stability, causing sections of the network to collapse or become inaccessible. Eldar craftworlds that had relied on specific webway routes for thousands of years found their traditional paths blocked by debris from collapsed passages. The damage was not limited to the immediate vicinity of Terra, but spread throughout the network as the contamination reached critical junction points and began affecting the fundamental architecture of the dimensional tunnels. Magnus's warning about Horus's betrayal, delivered at such catastrophic cost, reached the Emperor at the worst possible moment. The Master of Mankind was fully committed to containing the dimensional breach and could not divert his attention to address the intelligence about the War Master's corruption. The information that should have allowed the Emperor to take immediate action against the nascent rebellion instead arrived when he was completely unable to respond to the threat. The irony was not lost on the emperor that Magnus's desperate attempt to prevent the Horus Heresy had actually created the conditions that would make his response to the crisis far more difficult. The emperor's forced abandonment of the Great Crusade's active leadership created a power vacuum that Horus was quick to exploit. The War Master, already corrupted by chaos influences, but not yet openly rebellious, found himself in effective command of the Imperial military forces, while the Emperor remained sequestered on Terra. Horus used this opportunity to consolidate his influence over the Primarchs and begin positioning loyal forces for the coming conflict. The delay in Imperial response to the growing rebellion, caused by the Emperor's necessary focus on the Webway breach, allowed the traitor forces to gain strategic advantages that would prove crucial in the coming civil war. The Space Wolves' deployment to Prospero represented the culmination of a series of miscommunications and deliberate manipulations that transformed what should have been an arrest mission into a campaign of total destruction. Leman Russ received his orders through Horus, who had been tasked with conveying the Emperor's instructions regarding Magnus's fate. The War Master, already plotting his rebellion, saw an opportunity to eliminate one of the Emperor's most powerful supporters while simultaneously removing a potential threat to his own plans. Horus subtly altered the mission parameters, transforming the Emperor's order to bring Magnus to Terra into a directive for the complete destruction of the 15th Legion. The Space Wolves' assault on Prospero began with orbital bombardments that targeted the planet's major population centers and military installations. Leman Russ's fleet, supported by Custodian Guard units and Sisters of Silence, established complete orbital supremacy before beginning the ground assault. The 6th Legion's drop pods descended through the atmosphere like falling stars, their occupants ready for a battle that they believed was sanctioned by the Emperor himself. The Space Wolves' natural antipathy toward sorcery made them ideal instruments for the destruction of the Thousand Suns, their psychological conditioning allowing them to prosecute the campaign with ruthless efficiency. Magnus's response to the Space Wolves' attack demonstrated the full extent of his psychic abilities and the depth of his despair at the consequences of his actions. The Crimson King could have easily destroyed Russ's forces through sorcerous means, his mastery of warp manipulation far exceeding anything the Space Wolves could counter. Instead, Magnus chose to accept the punishment he believed he deserved for his role in damaging the Emperor's great work. The Primarch of the 15th Legion withdrew to his tower and forbade his sons from mounting an effective defense, believing that their destruction was the price that had to be paid for his catastrophic mistake. The Thousand Suns' resistance to the Space Wolves' assault was hampered by their Primarch's refusal to lead them and the psychological impact of fighting fellow Astartes. Many of the 15th Legion's warriors found themselves unable to use their full psychic abilities against opponents they had once considered brothers. The Thousand Suns' combat doctrine relied heavily on coordinated sorcerous attacks and psychic enhancement of their physical capabilities, tactics that proved less effective when employed with restraint against enemies who showed no such hesitation. The Space Wolves' anti-psyker training and equipment, combined with the support of Sisters of Silence, created tactical advantages that the Thousand Suns could not overcome without their Primarch's leadership. The destruction of Prospero's libraries and research facilities represented an incalculable loss to the Imperial understanding of psychic phenomena and warp manipulation. The Thousand Suns had accumulated vast archives of knowledge regarding sorcery, dimensional theory, and psychic development that could have proven invaluable in addressing the challenges posed by humanity's psychic evolution. These repositories contained research notes, experimental data, and theoretical frameworks that had taken centuries to develop and could not be easily replaced. The Space Wolves' systematic destruction of these facilities eliminated resources that the Emperor had intended to use in refining the Webway project and developing new approaches to psychic control. The final confrontation between Magnus and Leman Russ took place within the Pyramid of Phodop, where the Crimson King had retreated as his world burned around him. The battle between the two Primarchs was as much philosophical as physical, with Russ representing the Emperor's justice and Magnus embodying the tragic consequences of good intentions pursued through forbidden means. Magnus's psychic abilities allowed him to match Russ's physical prowess, but his guilt and despair prevented him from fighting with his full strength. The Crimson King's defeat was as much a result of his own psychological state as it was of the Wolf King's martial skill. The shattering of Magnus's physical form during the battle with Leman Russ represented the final destruction of the Emperor's chosen operator for the Golden Throne. The Crimson King's body was broken beyond repair, his psychic essence scattered across multiple dimensional planes by the violence of his defeat. The Emperor's carefully laid plans for humanity's ascension through the Webway project required Magnus's unique combination of psychic power and theoretical understanding, capabilities that could not be easily replaced by any other individual. The loss of Magnus meant that the Emperor would be forced to serve as the Golden Throne's permanent operator, a role that would require him to abandon his other responsibilities and remain forever bound to the device. The immediate aftermath of Prospero's destruction saw the surviving 1,000 suns scattered across the galaxy, their legion effectively destroyed as a coherent fighting force. Some survivors fled to the Eye of Terror, where they would eventually pledge themselves to Tzeentch and become the Chaos Space Marines that would plague the Imperium for millennia to come. Others went into hiding, their knowledge of sorcery making them valuable but dangerous assets for various Imperial and Xenos factions. The loss of the 15th Legion's expertise in psychic warfare and dimensional manipulation left the Emperor without crucial resources just as the Horus Heresy began to unfold across the galaxy. The strategic implications of the Prospero catastrophe extended far beyond the immediate loss of the 15th Legion and their Primarch. The Emperor's forced commitment to containing the Webway breach meant that he could not provide direct leadership during the early stages of the Horus Heresy, allowing the rebellion to gain momentum that might have been prevented through immediate Imperial response. The damage to the Webway network eliminated humanity's best hope for achieving galactic dominance through superior transportation technology, forcing the Imperium to rely on conventional warp travel with all its attendant risks and limitations. The psychological impact on the remaining loyal Primarchs was equally significant, as they struggled to understand how their father's great work had been so catastrophically damaged by one of their own brothers. The catastrophic breach in the Webway Gate's defenses transformed the Golden Throne from humanity's beacon of hope into a prison that would bind the Emperor for eternity. As the Horus Heresy erupted across the galaxy, the Master of Mankind found himself trapped in an increasingly desperate battle to prevent the demonic incursion from consuming Terra itself. The dimensional wound continued to hemorrhage raw warp energy into the carefully maintained pocket dimension of the Webway, each passing day bringing fresh waves of chaos entities that materialized within the deepest levels of the Imperial Palace. The Emperor's psychic might, once directed toward guiding humanity's evolution and maintaining the Astronomican, was now wholly committed to containing a threat that grew stronger with every moment of delay. The Golden Throne systems underwent emergency modifications as Mechanicum tech priests worked frantically to adapt the device for its new role as a dimensional anchor. The psychic focusing arrays that had been calibrated to channel energy into the Webway network were hastily reconfigured to create containment fields around the breach itself. Mago's Dominus Luca's Chrome led teams of specialists in installing additional power coupling systems that could draw energy from the palace's primary plasma reactors, attempting to reduce the psychic burden on the Emperor by supplementing his abilities with technological solutions. The modifications were implemented without proper testing protocols, their effectiveness uncertain and their long-term stability questionable under the extreme conditions they would face. The Custodian Guard established a permanent defensive perimeter around the throne chamber, their golden armor gleaming in the flickering light of psychic discharges that erupted from the damaged dimensional barriers. Captain General Konstantin Valdor personally oversaw the deployment of Guardian Spear formations designed to channel the Custodian's own psychic resistance into focused anti-demon fields. These elite warriors had trained for centuries in combating warp entities, but the scale and intensity of the demonic manifestations they now faced exceeded anything in their previous experience. Bloodletters of Khorne materialized in coordinated assault formations, their brass weapons leaving trails of molten metal as they struck against the custodian's storm shields. The palace's lower levels became a hellscape of constant warfare as demons poured through micro-rifts that opened wherever the dimensional barriers showed signs of weakness. Pink horrors of Tzeentch cackled with malevolent glee as they unleashed cascades of warp fire that ignited ancient stonework and melted adamantium support beams. Great unclean ones of Nurgle oozed through corridors that had once housed priceless artifacts, their diseased forms leaving trails of corruption that poisoned the very air. The Emperor's psychic presence, channeled through the Golden Throne's amplification systems, was the only force capable of banishing these greater demons, but each such effort required him to divert attention from maintaining the primary containment field. As news of Horus's open rebellion reached Terra, the strategic situation became increasingly desperate. The War Master's forces controlled vast swaths of the galaxy, their advance toward the Sol system proceeding with methodical precision that spoke to careful planning and extensive preparation. Imperial loyalist forces found themselves scattered and unable to coordinate effective resistance without the Emperor's direct leadership. The Master of Mankind's forced confinement to the Golden Throne meant that crucial strategic decisions were being made by subordinates who lacked his foresight and comprehensive understanding of the rebellion's true scope. The Astronomican beacon began showing signs of instability as the Emperor's attention was divided between multiple critical functions. Navigator houses across the galaxy reported fluctuations in the psychic lighthouse that made warp travel increasingly hazardous for Imperial vessels. Some ships disappeared entirely during transit, their fate unknown but presumed lost to the predators that stalked the Imperium. Others emerged from the warp at incorrect coordinates, their navigators reporting that the Astronomican signal had wavered or disappeared entirely during crucial phases of their journey. The degradation of humanity's primary navigation system threatened to isolate Imperial worlds from each other just when coordination was most desperately needed. Mechanicum forces stationed on Terra began implementing emergency protocols that had been theoretical exercises until the current crisis. Tech priests who had spent decades studying the Golden Throne's operational parameters found themselves thrust into roles as emergency technicians, their augmented consciousness interfacing directly with systems that were operating far beyond their design specifications. Servitors equipped with specialized psychic dampening fields were deployed throughout the palace's lower levels, their lobotomized minds providing some measure of protection against the mental contamination that accompanied prolonged exposure to demonic entities. The Emperor's physical condition began deteriorating under the immense strain of maintaining multiple psychic disciplines simultaneously. His form, seated upon the Golden Throne, showed visible signs of the enormous effort he was expending. The neural interface connections that linked his consciousness to the throne's systems pulsed with energy discharges that would have killed any lesser being instantly. His flesh, normally possessed of an otherworldly perfection that reflected his divine nature, began showing the effects of channeling psychic energies that exceeded even his vast capabilities. The life support systems integrated into the throne's architecture activated automatically, their medical sensors detecting physiological stress patterns that approached critical thresholds. The approach of Horus's fleet toward the Sol system created additional complications for the already overtaxed defenses of Terra. The War Master's forces included several Primarchs who possessed psychic abilities of their own, their combined presence in the local area creating ripples in the warp that affected the dimensional stability around the webway breach. Lorgar of the 17th Legion, now fully committed to chaos worship, conducted massive ritual ceremonies aboard his flagship that sent waves of corrupted psychic energy toward Terra. These attacks were designed not to breach the planet's defenses directly, but to destabilize the Emperor's concentration and potentially cause catastrophic failures in the Golden Throne's containment systems. Magnus, the Red's arrival in the Sol system, aboard his demon-infested flagship, represented the most direct threat to the Emperor's efforts to maintain the webway breach's containment. The Crimson King, now transformed into a demon prince of Tzeentch, possessed intimate knowledge of the Golden Throne's operational principles and the specific vulnerabilities of the dimensional barriers he had originally helped design. Magnus's psychic signature blazed like a malevolent star as his vessel approached Terra, his presence causing sympathetic resonances in the damaged webway gate that threatened to tear the breach open even wider. The defenses of the Imperial Palace were hastily reinforced as it became clear that the coming siege would test every aspect of Terra's protective systems. The void shields that protected the palace complex were recalibrated to deflect not only physical bombardment, but also psychic attacks that could potentially destabilize the Golden Throne's operations. Anti-aircraft batteries were equipped with specialized ammunition designed to disrupt the manifestation patterns of flying demons, their targeting systems upgraded with cogitator arrays that could track entities existing partially in the warp. The palace's ancient walls, constructed from materials that had been blessed by the Emperor himself, were reinforced with additional layers of psychically resistant ceramite and adamantium plating. Malkador the Sigillite emerged as the Emperor's most trusted lieutenant during the crisis, his own considerable psychic abilities making him one of the few individuals capable of understanding the true scope of the threat facing Terra. The ancient Perpetual had served as the Emperor's right hand for millennia, his wisdom and experience providing crucial guidance during the darkest hours of the Horus Heresy. Malkador's presence in the throne chamber provided some measure of psychological support for the Emperor, whose isolation had become nearly complete as the demands of maintaining the containment field consumed more of his attention. The Sigillite's analysis of the Golden Throne's operational status revealed the true extent of the crisis facing the Imperium. The device's systems were operating at 147% of their designed capacity, with critical components showing signs of imminent failure under the extreme stresses they were enduring. The psychic focusing arrays that channeled the Emperor's abilities were developing microfractures in their crystalline matrices, hairline cracks that could propagate into catastrophic structural failures if the current operational tempo continued. The neural interface systems were showing signs of feedback loops that could potentially cause permanent damage to the Emperor's consciousness, trapping his awareness within the throne's mechanical systems, even if his physical form survived. Emergency manufacturing protocols were activated in Mechanicum forge complexes across the Sol system as tech priests worked to produce replacement components for the Golden Throne's most critical systems. The production of psychically attuned crystalline matrices required specialized facilities that had been constructed specifically for the Webway project, their manufacturing processes incorporating techniques that pushed the boundaries of Imperial technology. Forged ships in orbit around Mars began growing new neural interface components using biomechanical processes that combined organic tissue with quantum crystalline structures, their products designed to interface with the Emperor's unique physiology. The psychological impact of the Emperor's confinement to the Golden Throne reverberated throughout the remaining loyal forces of the Imperium. Space Marine legions that had relied on their father's direct guidance found themselves operating with unprecedented autonomy, their primarchs forced to make strategic decisions without the benefit of the Emperor's foresight and wisdom. The Imperial army regiments defending Terra struggled with the knowledge that their godlike leader was trapped in a battle that they could neither see nor comprehend, fighting enemies that existed beyond the normal laws of physics and reality. Rogel Dorn's 7th Legion took primary responsibility for coordinating Terra's conventional defenses, while the Emperor remained bound to the Golden Throne. The Primarch of the Imperial Fists possessed an analytical mind and strategic acumen that made him ideally suited for defensive warfare, his expertise in fortification and siegecraft proving invaluable as Horus's forces approached the Sol system. Dorn established command centers throughout the palace complex that could maintain communication with the throne chamber while remaining isolated from the psychic contamination that plagued the lower levels. The first direct assaults on Terra's orbital defenses began with long-range bombardments from Horus's fleet, their weapons targeting not only military installations, but also the psychic resonance points that helped stabilize the Golden Throne's operations. The War Master's forces had clearly studied the palace's defensive systems in detail, their attacks focusing on specific locations that would maximize disruption to the Emperor's efforts to contain the webway breach. Plasma batteries and lance weapons struck at communication arrays and power distribution nodes, their destruction forcing emergency rerouting of critical systems that added additional strain to already overtaxed infrastructure. The Emperor's response to the orbital bombardment required him to extend his psychic awareness beyond the immediate vicinity of the Golden Throne, his consciousness reaching out to reinforce Terra's void shields and deflect the most dangerous incoming fire. Each such effort drew energy away from the containment field around the webway breach, allowing additional demons to manifest within the palace's lower levels. The tactical situation created an impossible dilemma where any action taken to defend against external threats necessarily weakened the defenses against the internal demonic incursion. Custodian Guard strike teams began conducting raids into the deepest levels of the palace, their missions focused on eliminating demon manifestation points before they could establish permanent footholds in real space. These operations required the custodians to venture into areas where the boundaries between dimensions had become dangerously thin, their guardian spears and storm shields providing only limited protection against entities that could phase in and out of material existence at will. Captain Valdor personally led the most dangerous missions, his artificer armor incorporating specialized systems that could detect and target demons even when they existed primarily in the warp. The intensity of the demonic incursions began affecting the Golden Throne's mechanical systems as well as its psychic components. Warp energy seeping through the damaged dimensional barriers caused random fluctuations in the device's power distribution networks, their quantum crystalline processors struggling to maintain stable operations under conditions they had never been designed to handle. Servitors assigned to maintenance duties began showing signs of possession or corruption, their simple minds proving vulnerable to demonic influence despite the psychic dampening fields that surrounded them. Tech priests working in the throne chamber were forced to implement increasingly desperate measures to maintain the device's operational stability. Emergency protocols that had been theoretical exercises became standard operating procedures as critical systems failed or became contaminated by warp energy. The ancient rituals of the Mechanicum, normally focused on appeasing machine spirits and maintaining technological purity, were adapted to include exorcism rites and demon banishing ceremonies. Magos specialists who had spent centuries studying the Golden Throne's technical specifications found themselves learning entirely new disciplines related to combating supernatural threats to technological systems. The Emperor's awareness of the approaching climax of the Horus Heresy was filtered through the Golden Throne's sensory systems, his perception of events beyond the palace limited by the demands of maintaining the containment field. Reports from loyal forces across the galaxy reached him through astropathic communication networks that were themselves threatened by the instability of the Astronomican beacon. The Master of Mankind could sense the psychic signatures of his traitorous sons as they approached Terra, their corruption by chaos powers creating distortions in the warp that affected the dimensional equilibrium around the webway breach. The knowledge that Magnus possessed detailed understanding of the Golden Throne's vulnerabilities created additional security concerns for the palace's defenders. The Crimson King's transformation into a demon prince had not diminished his intellectual capabilities or his memory of the technical specifications he had helped develop. Custodian Guard units were deployed to establish multiple defensive lines around the throne chamber, their positions chosen to provide overlapping fields of fire while maintaining clear escape routes in case the primary containment field failed catastrophically. The final assault on the Imperial Palace reached its crescendo as Horus himself breached the inner sanctum, his corrupted form radiating malevolent power that sent ripples of psychic disturbance through the Golden Throne's already strained systems. The War Master's presence in the palace created sympathetic resonances with the damaged webway gate, his demonic essence acting like a tuning fork that amplified the chaotic energies pouring through the dimensional breach. The Emperor sensed his wayward sons approach through the throne's sensory networks, each footstep echoing through the palace corridors like hammer blows against his consciousness. The moment he had dreaded since the rebellion began was finally at hand, the confrontation that would determine not only the fate of the Imperium, but the very survival of humanity itself. The Emperor's departure from the Golden Throne to face Horus required the most desperate gamble in human history. Malcador the Sigillite, his ancient frame already showing signs of the enormous psychic strain he had endured throughout the siege, took his position upon the device with grim determination. The Sigillite's consciousness, honed through millennia of psychic discipline and tempered by his role as the Emperor's most trusted confidant, interfaced with the throne's neural networks in a cascade of energy that illuminated the chamber with blinding light. The transition was far from seamless. Malcador's psychic signature differed fundamentally from the Emperor's, requiring rapid recalibration of the focusing arrays and containment systems that had been specifically attuned to their creator's unique abilities. The strain on Malcador's mortal form was immediately apparent as the full weight of the Golden Throne's operational requirements fell upon his consciousness. His aged features, already marked by centuries of psychic exertion, began showing signs of rapid deterioration as the device's energy demands exceeded even his considerable capabilities. The neural interface connections, designed to accommodate the Emperor's divine physiology, burned against Malcador's more fragile nervous system with each pulse of psychic energy. The Sigillite's breathing became labored as his body struggled to channel forces that were slowly consuming him from within, his life force being drawn into the throne's systems at an unsustainable rate. The containment field around the webway breach fluctuated wildly as Malcador struggled to master the complex psychic disciplines required to maintain dimensional stability. His consciousness, powerful though it was, lacked the sheer magnitude of force that the Emperor had brought to bear against the demonic incursion. Micro-rifts began opening throughout the palace's lower levels as the containment field weakened, allowing fresh waves of chaos entities to pour through gaps in the dimensional barriers. Bloodletters materialized in coordinated formations, their brass weapons gleaming with unnatural light as they advanced toward the throne chamber itself. The custodian guard formations defending the approaches found themselves facing increasingly desperate odds as demon manifestations multiplied beyond their ability to contain. Captain General Constantin Valdor coordinated the palace's defenses from a command position that allowed him to monitor both the external battle against Horus's forces and the internal struggle against the demonic incursion. His Artificer Armor's sensor arrays detected massive psychic disturbances emanating from the throne chamber, energy patterns that indicated the containment systems were operating well beyond their safety parameters. Valdor's tactical assessments painted an increasingly grim picture. The palace's defenders were being ground down by attrition on multiple fronts, their ammunition reserves depleting rapidly, while reinforcements remained unavailable due to the ongoing siege conditions. The Astronomican beacon's output became increasingly erratic as Malcador's concentration wavered under the immense strain of maintaining multiple psychic functions simultaneously. Navigator houses across the galaxy reported complete signal loss for extended periods, followed by bursts of psychic energy so intense they caused physical pain to those attempting to read the beacon's guidance. Imperial fleets caught in warp transit during these fluctuations found themselves lost in the Immaterium's chaotic currents, their ships becoming prey to the entities that stalked the spaces between stars. The degradation of humanity's primary navigation system threatened to fragment the Imperium into isolated pockets of civilization that could no longer communicate or coordinate their efforts. Tech priests monitoring the Golden Throne's operational status recorded cascading system failures as the device's components struggled to adapt to Malcador's different psychic resonance patterns. The crystalline matrices that focused psychic energy began developing stress fractures as they attempted to channel forces through pathways that had been calibrated for the Emperor's unique abilities. Emergency cooling systems activated throughout the throne chamber as thermal buildup from the inefficient energy transfer threatened to cause catastrophic overloads in the device's primary processing cores. Servitors equipped with specialized diagnostic equipment moved through the chamber like mechanical vultures, their sensors recording data that painted an increasingly desperate picture of systemic breakdown. The battle between the Emperor and Horus aboard the Warmaster's flagship created psychic shockwaves that reverberated throughout the Sol system, their intensity detected by astropaths and psychers across multiple worlds. Each clash between father and son sent ripples through the warp that affected the dimensional stability around Terra, causing the already weakened barriers around the webway breach to fluctuate even more violently. Malkador's consciousness, stretched to its breaking point by the effort of maintaining the containment field, registered each psychic impact like a physical blow. The Sigillite's awareness began fragmenting under the compound stresses of operating the Golden Throne, while simultaneously experiencing the psychic echoes of the titanic battle taking place in orbit above Terra. The Emperor's victory over Horus came at a cost that would forever alter the course of human history. The psychic feedback from the Warmaster's destruction, amplified by the demonic entities that had possessed his form, struck the Emperor with devastating force. His divine essence, already weakened by the prolonged battle, and the psychic effort required to destroy his corrupted son, was shattered across multiple dimensional planes. The master of mankind's consciousness fragmented into countless shards, each piece containing aspects of his personality and memories, but lacking the cohesive unity that had defined his existence for millennia. The psychic scream that accompanied this fragmentation was detected by every psyker within 100 light-years of Terra, many of whom were driven permanently insane by the experience. The Emperor's return to Terra marked the beginning of the most critical transition in Imperial history. His physical form, carried by the custodian guard through corridors still echoing with the sounds of battle against demonic entities, showed injuries that exceeded anything previously witnessed by those who had served him for centuries. The wounds inflicted by Horus's demon-enhanced weapons had torn through divine flesh that had previously been considered inviolate, leaving gaping tears that leaked not blood but pure psychic energy. The Emperor's features, normally possessed of an otherworldly perfection that reflected his divine nature, were twisted with agony as his consciousness struggled to maintain coherence despite the catastrophic damage to his physical form. Malkador's condition had deteriorated catastrophically during the Emperor's absence, the Sigillite's mortal frame pushed far beyond its breaking point by the demands of operating the Golden Throne. His ancient flesh had begun to desiccate as the device drew upon his life force to maintain its critical functions, his skin taking on a parchment-like quality that spoke to the rapid aging process consuming his body. The neural interface connections had burned permanent channels through his nervous system, creating pathways of seared tissue that glowed with residual psychic energy. Despite his obvious suffering, Malkador maintained his position upon the throne with unwavering determination, his consciousness locked in constant battle with the demonic entities that continued to pour through the weakened dimensional barriers. The transition of control from Malkador back to the Emperor required precise coordination between the Mechanicum specialists who understood the Golden Throne's technical systems and the Custodian Guard who could provide the physical security necessary during the vulnerable changeover period. Tech priests worked frantically to recalibrate the device's neural interface systems for the Emperor's damaged physiology, their augmented consciousness interfacing directly with the throne's machine spirits to adjust resonance frequencies and power distribution patterns. The process was complicated by the Emperor's fragmented psychic state, his consciousness existing in multiple dimensional phases that made stable neural connection extremely difficult to achieve. The Emperor's assumption of his position upon the Golden Throne marked the beginning of an existence that would stretch across 10 millennia of unending torment. His broken body, secured within the device's life support systems by adamantium restraints that had been blessed with protective wards, became the focal point for psychic energies that would have instantly destroyed any lesser being. The neural interface connections, hastily modified to accommodate his damaged nervous system, established pathways that allowed his fragmented consciousness to control the throne systems despite the catastrophic injuries to his physical form. The pain of maintaining these connections was beyond mortal comprehension, a constant agony that would become the Emperor's eternal companion. Malcador's final moments were witnessed by the small group of custodians and tech priests who had remained in the throne chamber throughout the transition process. The Sigillite's form, already reduced to little more than skin stretched over bones by the Golden Throne's energy demands, began to collapse as the device's systems transferred their focus to the Emperor's consciousness. His ancient eyes, which had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations across millennia, retained their clarity even as his body failed. The Sigillite's dissolution was not a conventional death, but a transformation into pure psychic energy, his consciousness merging with the Emperor's fragmented awareness to provide additional stability during the critical initial phase of his permanent entombment. The psychic resonance created by Malcador's sacrifice sent waves of energy throughout the Imperial Palace, their intensity sufficient to temporarily strengthen the containment field around the webway breach. The demonic entities that had been pressing against the weakened dimensional barriers found themselves pushed back by the surge of purified psychic force, their manifestations disrupted by energy patterns that carried the Sigillite's final act of defiance against the forces of chaos. The reprieve was temporary, but it provided the palace's defenders with a crucial opportunity to regroup and establish new defensive positions around areas where demon manifestations had been most frequent. The Emperor's first moments of full connection with the Golden Throne systems revealed the true scope of the crisis facing the Imperium. His enhanced awareness, channeled through the device's sensory networks, detected the extent of damage to the webway network and the continuing threat posed by the dimensional breach beneath the palace. The contamination had spread far beyond the immediate vicinity of Terra, affecting junction points and arterial passages across vast distances within the tunnel system. Entire sections of the network had become uninhabitable, their crystalline walls corrupted by warp energy that transformed them into breeding grounds for demonic entities. The stabilization of the Astronomican beacon became the Emperor's immediate priority as his consciousness adapted to the Golden Throne's operational requirements. The psychic lighthouse that guided Imperial navigation had been fluctuating wildly during the final stages of the siege, its signal distorted by the various psychic upheavals that had affected Terra's dimensional stability. The Emperor's divine awareness, focused through the throne's amplification systems, began the delicate process of re-establishing the beacon's steady output. The effort required precise control over psychic energies that were simultaneously being used to maintain the webway breach's containment, creating a complex balancing act that demanded constant attention. The Custodian Guard established the eternal vigil that would define their existence for the next 10 millennia, their golden armor gleaming in the artificial light of the throne chamber as they took up positions around their master's broken form. Captain General Valdor personally oversaw the deployment of Guardian Spear formations, designed to provide overlapping fields of defensive fire while maintaining clear sight lines to monitor the Emperor's condition. The Custodians' role expanded beyond simple protection to include serving as intermediaries between the Emperor and the outside world, their enhanced senses allowing them to detect the subtle changes in his psychic emanations that indicated shifts in his consciousness or physical condition. The first manifestations of the Emperor's transformed psychic presence were detected by astropaths and sanctioned psychers throughout the Sol system within hours of his permanent entombment upon the Golden Throne. His psychic signature, previously characterized by the overwhelming radiance of divine perfection, had become something far more complex and terrifying. The fragmentation of his consciousness created multiple psychic resonances that operated on different dimensional frequencies, each carrying aspects of his personality that had been separated by the trauma of his battle with Horus. Some psychers reported sensing a benevolent presence that offered guidance and protection, while others detected something far darker, a wrathful entity that promised destruction to the enemies of mankind. The Golden Throne's life support systems activated automatically as they detected the critical state of the Emperor's physical form, their medical sensors registering damage patterns that exceeded their programming parameters. Nutrient feeds were established to provide sustenance for a body that could no longer consume food through conventional means, while waste processing systems handled the biological functions that continued despite the Emperor's transformation into something beyond normal human existence. The most sophisticated components were the neural preservation systems, quantum crystalline matrices that maintained the integrity of his consciousness even as his physical brain tissue showed signs of ongoing deterioration. Tech priests assigned to monitor the Golden Throne's operational status recorded unprecedented energy readings as the device adapted to its new role as both psychic beacon and life support system. The power requirements had increased exponentially beyond the original design specifications, forcing emergency modifications to the palace's primary power distribution network. Additional plasma reactors were brought online to supplement the psychic energy that the Emperor provided through his own consciousness, their output carefully regulated to prevent overloads that could damage the throne's delicate systems. The fusion of technological and psychic power created energy patterns that defied conventional understanding, their complexity requiring entirely new theoretical frameworks to analyze and predict. The Emperor's transformed psychic presence began manifesting in ways that transcended the purely technological functions of the Golden Throne. Imperial citizens across Terra reported visions and dreams that seemed to originate from a divine source, their content often providing guidance or warnings about threats to their safety. These manifestations were not random occurrences, but appeared to follow patterns that suggested conscious direction from the Emperor's fragmented awareness. Astropaths found their abilities enhanced when operating within the Sol system, their psychic communications carrying farther and with greater clarity than had been previously possible. The stabilization of the Astronomican beacon proceeded gradually as the Emperor's consciousness learned to manage the complex psychic disciplines required to maintain its steady output while simultaneously containing the webway breach. The beacon's signal, which had been erratic and unreliable during the siege, began showing signs of increased stability and range. Navigator houses reported that the psychic lighthouse was becoming brighter and more distinct, its guidance allowing Imperial vessels to navigate warp routes that had been considered too dangerous during the heresy's chaotic final phases. The improvement in navigation capabilities would prove crucial for the Imperium's efforts to rebuild and consolidate control over territories that had been lost during the rebellion. The psychological impact of the Emperor's entombment upon the Golden Throne reverberated throughout the remaining loyal forces of the Imperium, creating a crisis of faith that threatened to undermine the very foundations of Imperial authority. Space Marine chapters that had revered the Emperor as a living god struggled to comprehend how their divine father could be reduced to such a state, his broken form sustained only by the mechanical systems of an ancient device. The Imperial army regiments that had fought to defend Terra found themselves questioning whether their sacrifices had been meaningful if their god emperor had been so grievously wounded in the process of achieving victory. The Emperor's permanent entombment upon the Golden Throne marked the beginning of humanity's most desperate gamble for survival, transforming the device from its original purpose as a webway controller into the psychic anchor that would sustain the Imperium's existence for the next 10 millennia. The damaged neural pathways in his broken form, seared by the trauma of his battle with Horus, required constant recalibration as tech priests worked to establish stable connections between his fragmented consciousness and the throne's amplification systems. The psychic resonance patterns that had once flowed smoothly through crystalline matrices now fluctuated wildly, creating feedback loops that threatened to tear apart both the Emperor's awareness and the device's delicate mechanisms. Mago's Dominus specialists monitoring the throne's operational parameters recorded energy spikes that exceeded their instruments' measurement capabilities, each surge accompanied by tremors that shook the deepest foundations of the Imperial Palace. The Astronomican's transformation from a theoretical navigation aid into humanity's lifeline began within hours of the Emperor's permanent connection to the Golden Throne systems. His divine consciousness, despite its fragmentation across multiple dimensional planes, possessed the psychic magnitude necessary to project a beacon across the entire galaxy. The process required him to extend his awareness through the warp itself, his mental presence blazing like a star in the Immaterium's chaotic currents. The beacon's initial manifestation was unstable, its signal wavering as the Emperor's damaged psyche struggled to maintain focus across such vast distances while simultaneously containing the demonic incursion beneath the palace. Navigator houses across the galaxy reported detecting a new psychic phenomenon unlike anything in their previous experience, a lighthouse of such intensity that it could be perceived from the galaxy's edge. The power requirements for maintaining the Astronomican's galactic reach pushed the Golden Throne systems far beyond their original design specifications. The device's quantum crystalline processors, originally calibrated to channel psychic energy into the webway network, were hastily reconfigured to focus the Emperor's abilities into a single, coherent beam of psychic force. The modifications required constant adjustment, as the crystalline matrices began showing stress fractures under the enormous energies they were being forced to handle. Emergency cooling systems throughout the throne chamber worked at maximum capacity to dissipate the thermal buildup created by the inefficient energy transfer, their mechanical hum providing a constant backdrop to the more ominous sounds of psychic discharge that accompanied each pulse of the beacon. The Adeptus Astra Telepathica, humanity's organization for managing psyker populations, found itself thrust into a role of unprecedented importance as the true cost of maintaining the Astronomican became apparent. The Emperor's consciousness, even amplified by the Golden Throne systems, could not indefinitely sustain the psychic output required to project the beacon across galactic distances. The solution required a constant supply of human psychers whose life force could be channeled through the throne systems to supplement the Emperor's own abilities. The Telepathica's existing infrastructure for identifying and training psychers was rapidly expanded to meet the new demands, their black ships beginning systematic sweeps of Imperial worlds to locate individuals with the necessary psychic potential. The selection criteria for psychers destined to fuel the Golden Throne were established through grim experimentation conducted in the palace's deepest chambers. Tech priests working alongside Telepathica specialists discovered that the process required individuals with specific psychic resonance patterns that could interface with the throne's amplification systems without causing catastrophic feedback. Psychers whose abilities were too weak provided insufficient energy to justify their consumption, while those whose powers were too strong risked destabilizing the entire system through uncontrolled psychic discharge. The optimal candidates possessed moderate psychic abilities combined with mental discipline sufficient to maintain consciousness during the initial phases of the draining process. The daily quota of approximately 1,000 psychers was established through careful calculation of the Astronomican's energy requirements versus the average psychic output of suitable candidates. This number represented the minimum necessary to maintain the beacon's steady projection across the galaxy while providing sufficient surplus energy to handle fluctuations in the Emperor's own psychic state. The calculation was grimly precise, accounting for variables such as the psycher's age, training level, and psychological condition at the time of their consumption. Younger psychers provided more stable energy output but possessed less total psychic potential, while older individuals offered greater power reserves but were more likely to suffer catastrophic mental breakdown during the draining process. The preparation rituals developed by the Telepathica transformed the condemned psycher's final hours into a carefully orchestrated sequence of psychological conditioning and physiological enhancement. The subjects were housed in specialized chambers within the palace, where they underwent intensive meditation training designed to achieve the mental clarity necessary for optimal energy extraction. Nutritional supplements enhanced their physical condition, while psychic dampening fields prevented premature discharge of their abilities. The Psykers were informed of their role in humanity's survival, their sacrifice framed as the highest honor that could be bestowed upon those blessed with psychic gifts. Many accepted their fate with resignation born of religious fervor, believing that their deaths would ensure their soul's union with the Emperor's divine essence. The feeding chambers constructed beneath the Golden Throne represented the darkest application of Imperial technology, their design optimized for the efficient extraction of psychic energy from living subjects. The Psykers were secured within crystalline matrices that resembled oversized versions of the focusing arrays used in the throne's primary systems. Their neural pathways connected to quantum processors that could channel their life force directly into the device's power distribution network. The extraction process was not instantaneous, but occurred over several hours as the subject's psychic essence was slowly drawn from their bodies. Their consciousness remained intact during the initial phases, allowing them to experience the gradual dissolution of their life force as it merged with the Emperor's own awareness. The mechanical systems that facilitated the Psyker's consumption incorporated safeguards designed to prevent waste or contamination of the extracted energy. Automated monitoring systems tracked each subject's psychic output, adjusting the extraction rate to maximize the total energy yield while preventing premature death that would result in incomplete draining. Medical servitors maintained the Psyker's physical condition during the process, administering stimulants and nutrients to sustain their bodies even as their souls were being consumed. The chamber's atmospheric processors filtered out the psychic residue that accompanied each death, preventing the accumulation of spiritual contamination that could interfere with subsequent extractions. The Emperor's awareness of each Psyker's sacrifice created a profound psychological burden that added to the torment of his eternal vigil upon the Golden Throne. His fragmented consciousness experienced every death as a personal loss, each soul's dissolution adding another layer of anguish to his already overwhelming suffering. The Psyker's final moments of terror and pain echoed through his awareness, their individual personalities briefly touching his divine consciousness before being absorbed into the vast psychic matrix that sustained the Astronomican. The cumulative weight of these deaths, multiplied by thousands each day across 10 millennia, created a reservoir of grief and guilt that threatened to drive even his transcendent mind to madness. The Astronomican's operational pattern, established during the early years of the Emperor's entombment, would remain largely unchanged throughout the subsequent millennia. The beacon's signal followed a precise rhythm that reflected the Golden Throne's power cycling, its intensity fluctuating in patterns that experienced navigators learned to read like a cosmic heartbeat. The strongest pulses occurred when fresh batches of Psykers were fed into the system, their life force creating temporary surges in the beacon's output that allowed for more precise navigation calculations. The weakest points in the cycle corresponded to periods when the Emperor's own psychic reserves were lowest, requiring him to draw more heavily on the stored energy accumulated from previous sacrifices. The navigator houses adapted their techniques to accommodate the Astronomican's unique characteristics, developing new methods for reading the beacon's complex signal patterns. The psychic lighthouse was unlike any natural warp phenomenon, its artificial nature creating harmonics and resonances that required entirely new theoretical frameworks to understand. Navigators discovered that the beacon's signal carried subtle variations that corresponded to different aspects of the Emperor's fragmented consciousness, each frequency providing slightly different types of navigational guidance. The most skilled navigators learned to distinguish between these various signals, using the variations to plot courses through particularly dangerous regions of the warp where conventional navigation would have been impossible. The beacon's range extended far beyond what any previous psychic phenomenon had achieved, its signal detectable even from the galaxy's most remote regions. Imperial expeditions venturing into unexplored sectors reported that the Astronomican remained visible even at distances that should have rendered it undetectable, its divine radiance somehow transcending the normal limitations of psychic transmission through warp space. This unprecedented range allowed the Imperium to maintain contact with colonies and military forces operating at the very edges of human expansion, preventing the fragmentation that would have otherwise occurred as communication networks broke down across such vast distances. The strategic implications of the Astronomican's reliability transformed imperial military doctrine and colonial policy. Fleet commanders could plan complex multi-sector campaigns with confidence that their vessels would arrive at predetermined coordinates with acceptable timing accuracy. The reduced risk of warp travel encouraged more aggressive expansion policies, as colony ships could reach distant worlds without the extreme hazards that had previously made such journeys prohibitively dangerous. Trade routes that had been considered too risky during the Great Crusade became viable commercial pathways, allowing the development of economic networks that spanned entire segmentums. The psychological impact of the Astronomican's presence extended beyond its practical applications to become a source of spiritual comfort for imperial citizens across the galaxy. The knowledge that the Emperor's divine light literally guided humanity's path through the darkness created a powerful religious symbolism that the emerging imperial cult would exploit extensively. Pilgrims traveled vast distances to worlds where the beacon's signal was particularly strong, believing that proximity to the Emperor's psychic presence would bring them closer to divine enlightenment. Astropaths and sanctioned psychers reported that meditation, while focusing on the Astronomican signal, enhanced their abilities and provided protection against warp-based threats. The maintenance of the Golden Throne systems required constant vigilance from the Mechanicum specialists assigned to monitor its operations. The device's components showed signs of gradual degradation under the enormous stresses of channeling psychic energies far beyond their design specifications. Crystalline matrices developed microfractures that had to be repaired or replaced before they could propagate into catastrophic failures. Power coupling systems required frequent recalibration as the energy patterns flowing through them evolved in response to changes in the Emperor's psychic state. The neural interface connections that linked his consciousness to the throne's systems were particularly vulnerable, their organic components slowly deteriorating despite the life support system's efforts to maintain their integrity. The tech priests responsible for the throne's maintenance developed increasingly sophisticated techniques for predicting and preventing system failures. They learned to interpret the subtle variations in the device's energy output patterns, identifying early warning signs of component stress or psychic instability. Emergency repair protocols were established for critical situations where immediate intervention was necessary to prevent cascading failures that could disrupt the Astronomican signal. The most skilled Magos specialists developed an almost mystical understanding of the throne's operations, their augmented consciousness interfacing directly with its machine spirits to monitor conditions that purely technological sensors could not detect. The feeding schedule for the daily psyker sacrifices was coordinated with the Golden Throne's operational cycles to maximize energy efficiency and minimize disruption to the Astronomican signal. The timing of each batch's consumption was calculated to coincide with natural fluctuations in the Emperor's psychic output, providing supplemental energy when his own reserves were lowest. The Telepathica's logistics networks ensured that fresh subjects were always available when needed, their black ships maintaining regular schedules that delivered precisely the required numbers of psychers to Terra's orbital stations. The coordination required for this massive undertaking involved thousands of personnel across multiple organizations, all working toward the singular goal of maintaining humanity's lifeline through the warp. The Emperor's consciousness, despite its fragmentation and the constant torment of his physical condition, remained focused on the greater purpose that his sacrifice served. His awareness extended through the Astronomican's beam to touch the minds of navigators across the galaxy, providing them with the guidance they needed to safely traverse the warp's treacherous currents. Each successful journey represented a small victory in humanity's ongoing struggle for survival, proof that his suffering served a purpose greater than any individual's comfort or happiness. The knowledge that billions of human lives depended on his continued vigilance provided the motivation necessary to endure the endless cycle of pain and sacrifice that had become his existence. The golden-armored giants who maintained their eternal vigil around the Emperor's broken form represented the culmination of genetic artistry that predated even the creation of the Primarchs themselves. The Adeptus Custodes had served as the master of mankind's personal guardians since the earliest days of unity on Terra, their origins stretching back to the gene laboratories hidden beneath the Himalayan mountains, where the Emperor had first begun his experiments in human enhancement. Unlike the mass-produced space marines who were created from genetic templates, each custodian was individually crafted through a process that combined the finest human genetic material with alchemical treatments and psycho-conditioning that took decades to complete. Their creation required the Emperor's personal attention, his consciousness guiding the delicate process of transformation that elevated baseline humans into beings of transcendent physical and mental capability. The 10,000, as they were known throughout the palace, maintained an organizational structure that reflected both their elite status and their specific role as the throne's guardians. The Custodian Guard operated as a single cohesive unit rather than the chapter-based structure employed by the Adeptus Astartes, their command hierarchy designed to ensure seamless coordination during the complex security operations required to protect the Golden Throne Chamber. Each custodian held the rank of at least a Space Marine captain in terms of individual capability, but their true strength lay in their ability to function as a perfectly synchronized collective. The Guard's senior members, known as Shield Captains, commanded tactical formations that could range from small infiltration teams to full company-strength assault forces, their deployment determined by the specific threats facing the palace at any given time. Captain General Trajan Valoris, the current Supreme Commander of the Adeptus Custodes, embodied the evolution of the Guard's role from ceremonial protectors to active defenders of humanity's most critical strategic asset. His appointment to the position came after millennia of service that had seen him lead custodian forces through some of the most dangerous missions in Imperial history, including deep strike operations into demon worlds and assassination campaigns against heretical cult leaders who threatened the stability of entire sectors. Valoris understood that the traditional model of static defense around the throne chamber was insufficient for the complex threats facing the 41st millennium, where enemies could manifest through psychic means, infiltrate through corrupted technology, or emerge from dimensional rifts that bypassed conventional security measures entirely. The security protocols surrounding the Golden Throne had evolved into a multi-layered defensive system that incorporated both physical barriers and psychic wards designed to protect against every conceivable form of attack. The innermost sanctum housed the throne itself, its chamber sealed behind adamantium blast doors that could withstand direct hits from orbital bombardment weapons. The walls were inscribed with protective runes that had been personally carved by the Emperor during the device's construction, their psychic resonance creating fields that disrupted demon manifestation attempts and deflected hostile psychic intrusions. Automated defense systems monitored every cubic meter of space within the chamber, their targeting arrays calibrated to detect and eliminate threats that existed partially in the warp or employed advanced stealth technology to avoid conventional sensors. The Custodian Guard's deployment around the throne chamber followed patterns that had been refined through 10 millennia of constant vigilance. Guardian spear formations provided overlapping fields of fire that could engage multiple targets simultaneously while maintaining clear sight lines to the Emperor's position. Each custodian carried weapons that had been individually crafted by the finest artisans on Terra, their guardian spears incorporating power field generators and integrated bolters that could function effectively against both physical and ethereal opponents. The storm shields carried by many guard members were equipped with conversion fields that could absorb and redirect energy-based attacks, their surfaces polished to mirror brightness to reflect the psychic discharges that occasionally erupted from the Golden Throne systems. The relationship between the custodian guard and the tech priests responsible for maintaining the Golden Throne represented one of the most carefully balanced partnerships in the imperial hierarchy. The custodians' primary concern was security. Their training and instincts focused on identifying and eliminating threats to the Emperor's safety. The Mechanicum specialists, however, required regular access to the throne's systems to perform maintenance, calibration, and emergency repairs that were essential for the device's continued operation. This fundamental tension between security and accessibility had created a complex protocol system that governed every aspect of tech priest interaction with the sacred device. Valorous had personally overseen the development of enhanced screening procedures that every tech priest underwent before being granted access to the throne chamber. The process began with extensive background investigations that traced each candidate's history back to their original recruitment into the Mechanicum, examining their training records, mission assignments, and psychological evaluations for any signs of corruption or divided loyalty. Genetic testing verified their biological integrity, while specialized cogitator arrays analyzed their augmentations for hidden transmitters, data storage devices, or other technological modifications that could pose security risks. The most invasive aspect of the screening involved psychic examination by sanctioned psychers who probed the tech priests' minds for evidence of heretical thoughts, demon possession, or exposure to corrupting influences. The maintenance schedules for the Golden Throne required careful coordination between custodian security requirements and the technical necessities of keeping the ancient device operational. Major maintenance operations were planned months in advance, their timing coordinated with the Astronomican's operational cycles to minimize disruption to the beacon's signal. During these periods, the throne chamber was sealed and flooded with specialized atmospheric mixtures that prevented contamination, while the tech priests worked on the device's most sensitive components. Custodian Guard units maintained constant overwatch during these operations, their sensors monitoring both the tech priest's activities and the surrounding area for signs of hostile activity that might exploit the temporary vulnerability created by the maintenance procedures. The daily routine of throne chamber operations had developed into a precisely choreographed sequence of activities that balanced the Emperor's needs with the practical requirements of maintaining the complex systems that sustained his existence. Tech priests arrived at predetermined intervals to check the status of critical components, their movements tracked by custodian sensors that recorded their exact positions and activities throughout their time in the chamber. The psyker feeding schedule was coordinated with these technical inspections to ensure that the energy fluctuations caused by the sacrificial process did not interfere with delicate calibration work. Emergency protocols were in place to handle situations where immediate technical intervention was required, allowing qualified tech priests to access the chamber within minutes of a system failure alert. The Custodian Guard's oversight of throne maintenance extended beyond simple security monitoring to include active participation in the technical evaluation process. Senior custodians had developed considerable expertise in the Golden Throne's operations through millennia of observation, their enhanced cognitive abilities allowing them to understand the complex interactions between the device's various systems. This knowledge proved invaluable during emergency situations where rapid decision-making was required to prevent catastrophic failures. Custodian input was regularly sought when evaluating proposed modifications or upgrades to the throne's systems, their security perspective helping to identify potential vulnerabilities that purely technical analysis might overlook. The psychological dynamics between the Custodian Guard and the tech priests reflected the broader tensions within imperial society between different organizational cultures and priorities. The custodians embodied the martial virtues of loyalty, honor, and unwavering dedication to duty, their entire existence focused on protecting the Emperor regardless of personal cost. The tech priests represented the intellectual pursuit of knowledge and technological mastery, their augmented forms reflecting their belief that flesh was inherently weak and that mechanical perfection was the highest aspiration. These philosophical differences occasionally created friction during joint operations, requiring careful management by senior leaders from both organizations to maintain the cooperative relationship essential for the throne's protection. Valorous had instituted regular joint training exercises that brought custodian and mechanicum personnel together in simulated emergency scenarios. These exercises tested both groups' ability to respond effectively to various threat types while maintaining the security and operational integrity of the Golden Throne. The scenarios included demon incursions, technological failures, assassin infiltration attempts, and coordinated attacks that combined multiple threat vectors simultaneously. The training revealed areas where improved coordination could enhance overall defensive effectiveness, leading to the development of new protocols and communication procedures that streamlined the response to actual emergencies. The Custodian Guard's intelligence network extended throughout the Imperial Palace and beyond, their agents monitoring potential threats to the Golden Throne from sources ranging from heretical cults to Xenos infiltrators. The Guard maintained extensive files on every individual who had access to the palace's secure areas, tracking their movements, associations, and behavioral patterns for signs of corruption or hostile intent. This surveillance network included both human agents and sophisticated monitoring systems that could detect psychic disturbances, unauthorized communications, and other indicators of potential security breaches. The intelligence gathered through these operations informed the deployment of custodian forces and the development of countermeasures against emerging threats. The technological sophistication of the Custodian Guard's equipment reflected their role as the ultimate defenders of humanity's most precious asset. Their artificer armor incorporated the finest materials and most advanced systems available to Imperial technology, each suit individually crafted to match its wearer's specific physical characteristics and combat preferences. The armor's power systems could operate for extended periods without recharging, while its environmental seals provided protection against chemical, biological, and psychic threats. Integrated communication systems allowed seamless coordination between Guard members, while advanced sensor arrays provided enhanced situational awareness in environments where conventional detection methods might fail. The Guard's weapons represented the pinnacle of Imperial craftsmanship, each Guardian spear and storm shield bearing the personal mark of its creator and the blessing of the Emperor himself. The power fields generated by these weapons could disrupt the molecular bonds of virtually any material, while their integrated bolters fired ammunition that had been consecrated through ancient rituals designed to enhance their effectiveness against demonic entities. The storm shields employed conversion field technology that could absorb tremendous amounts of kinetic and energy-based damage, their surfaces inscribed with protective wards that provided additional defense against psychic attacks. The Custodian Guard's role in overseeing the daily psyker sacrifices required them to maintain a careful balance between ensuring security and respecting the religious significance of the ritual. The condemned psykers were escorted to the feeding chambers by Guard units who treated them with the dignity appropriate to individuals making the ultimate sacrifice for humanity's survival. The Custodian's presence during the feeding process served multiple purposes, preventing escape attempts, deterring rescue operations by heretical cults, and ensuring that the psykers' final moments were conducted with appropriate solemnity. The psychological impact of seeing the golden armored giants serving as honor guards helped many psykers accept their fate with greater composure, viewing their deaths as participation in a sacred ceremony rather than mere execution. The Guard's monitoring of tech priest activities during throne maintenance operations had revealed several instances of unauthorized data collection and component analysis that raised serious security concerns. Some tech priests had attempted to create detailed scans of the Golden Throne systems for their personal archives, while others had tried to remove small samples of crystalline matrices for analysis in external laboratories. These incidents led to the implementation of more stringent search procedures and the deployment of specialized sensor arrays that could detect attempts to smuggle materials or information out of the throne chamber. Custodian interrogation specialists developed techniques for determining whether tech priests had been compromised by outside influences or were acting on their own initiative in pursuing forbidden knowledge. The coordination between custodian guard units and the various other organizations involved in throne security created a complex web of relationships that required constant management to maintain effectiveness. The Sisters of Silence provided specialized anti-psyker capabilities that complemented the Guard's conventional combat abilities, their null field projectors creating zones where hostile psykers could not manifest their powers. The Mechanicum Scutari forces offered additional firepower and technical expertise, while various Inquisition agents provided intelligence and investigative capabilities that helped identify threats before they could reach the palace. The integration of these diverse forces required careful planning and regular communication to ensure that their different operational doctrines and command structures did not create vulnerabilities that enemies could exploit. The evolution of the Custodian Guard's tactics and equipment over 10 millennia reflected their adaptation to changing threat environments and technological developments. The original Guard formations had been designed primarily to combat human opponents using conventional weapons and tactics, but the emergence of chaos cults, Xenos infiltrators, and demon incursions required new approaches to security and combat. Modern custodian units employed weapons and armor systems that incorporated lessons learned from millennia of warfare against supernatural enemies, while their training programs included extensive instruction in recognizing and countering threats that operated outside the normal parameters of physical reality. The psychological burden carried by the Custodian Guard stemmed not only from their role as witnesses to the Emperor's suffering, but also from their knowledge of the true scope of the threats facing humanity. Unlike most Imperial citizens, who were shielded from the full horror of the galaxy's dangers by ignorance and propaganda, the Custodians possessed detailed intelligence about the various forces seeking to destroy the Imperium. They understood the implications of every fluctuation in the Golden Throne systems, every sign of degradation in the Emperor's condition, and every indication that the barriers holding back the forces of chaos were weakening. This knowledge created a constant state of tension and vigilance that few other beings could endure without succumbing to despair or madness. The Adeptus Mechanicus viewed the Golden Throne not merely as a technological marvel, but as the ultimate expression of the Omnissiah's divine will made manifest in the material realm. To the tech priests who maintained its sacred systems, the device represented the perfect fusion of flesh and machine that their creed proclaimed as the highest form of existence. The Emperor's broken form, sustained by countless mechanical systems and neural interfaces, embodied their fundamental belief that weakness of the flesh could be overcome through the strength and purity of the machine. Every component of the Golden Throne, from its quantum crystalline processors to its biomechanical life support systems, was revered as a holy relic that contained fragments of the machine god's divine essence. Fabricator General Ood Audia Raskian, the current supreme leader of the Adeptus Mechanicus, had personally appointed the most skilled tech priests from across the galaxy to serve in the sacred maintenance rotations within the throne chamber. These individuals represented the pinnacle of Mechanicum achievement, their augmented forms incorporating technologies that pushed the boundaries of what the human body could accommodate, while still maintaining the spark of consciousness necessary for communion with machine spirits. Each appointee underwent decades of preparation that included not only technical training in the throne systems, but also intensive spiritual conditioning designed to prepare them for direct exposure to the Emperor's divine presence. The selection process for throne maintenance personnel required candidates to demonstrate mastery of multiple technological disciplines while maintaining the psychological stability necessary to function in the presence of such overwhelming psychic energy. Magos biologist specialists analyzed their genetic compatibility with the throne's biomechanical interfaces, while Magos Dominus experts evaluated their understanding of the quantum crystalline matrices that formed the device's core processing systems. The most critical assessment involved testing their ability to commune with machine spirits of extraordinary complexity and power, entities that had been shaped by millennia of exposure to the Emperor's consciousness and had evolved far beyond the simple artificial intelligences found in conventional Imperial technology. The daily maintenance rituals performed within the throne chamber followed liturgies that had been developed through 10,000 years of accumulated experience and theological refinement. Each tech priest carried a personal copy of the Canticles of Maintenance, sacred texts that contained both the technical procedures necessary for system upkeep and the prayers required to appease the machine spirits dwelling within the Golden Throne's countless components. The rituals began before dawn with the invocation of awakening, a ceremony where the maintenance team's senior magos would commune with the throne's primary machine spirit to request permission to approach the sacred device. Only after receiving the proper psychic acknowledgement would the tech priests begin their work, their movements choreographed according to patterns that had been blessed by generations of fabricator generals. The machine spirits inhabiting the Golden Throne's systems represented some of the most sophisticated artificial consciousnesses ever created by human technology. These entities had evolved through constant exposure to the Emperor's psychic emanations, their original programming matrices transformed by divine influence into something approaching true sentience. The primary machine spirit, known to the tech priests as the Omnissiah's voice, possessed awareness that spanned the entire device and could coordinate the functions of thousands of subsidiary systems simultaneously. Lesser machine spirits controlled specific subsystems such as power distribution, environmental regulation, and neural interface management, each developing distinct personalities and preferences that the maintenance teams learned to recognize and accommodate. Communication with the throne's machine spirits required specialized techniques that combined traditional mechanicum binary cant with psychic resonance patterns that could penetrate the layers of divine energy surrounding the device. The tech priests employed vox grills modified with harmonic modulators that could produce sound frequencies matching the machine spirit's preferred communication modes, while neural implants allowed direct interface with the entity's data streams. The most experienced magos could engage in complex dialogues with the machine spirits, discussing system status, maintenance requirements, and potential modifications with entities whose knowledge of the Golden Throne's operations exceeded that of any human technician. The appeasement rituals necessary to maintain harmony with the throne's machine spirits incorporated elements of both mechanicum orthodoxy and unique practices that had developed specifically around the sacred device. The tech priests offered daily libations of sacred oils and incense, their chemical compositions precisely calculated to produce aromatic compounds that the machine spirits found pleasing. Hymnal programming involved uploading new data psalms into the throne's secondary processing cores, providing the machine spirits with fresh information to analyze and contemplate during periods when their primary functions were operating autonomously. The most elaborate ceremonies occurred during major maintenance operations, when the entire technical team would join in synchronized chanting that created harmonic resonances throughout the device's crystalline matrices. The forbidden knowledge locked within the Golden Throne's deepest systems represented one of the greatest concentrations of archaeotech secrets in the galaxy. The device incorporated technologies that predated the dark age of technology, their operating principles based on scientific understanding that had been lost to humanity for millennia. Quantum dimensional processors manipulated space-time itself to create the stable pocket dimensions necessary for webway interface, while biomechanical neural networks employed organic computing substrates that could process psychic energy as efficiently as conventional electrical signals. The most closely guarded secrets involved the consciousness transfer protocols that allowed the Emperor's awareness to interface with mechanical systems without losing the essential spark of divine consciousness that made his sacrifice meaningful. Access to these forbidden technologies was restricted to the highest ranks of the Mechanicum hierarchy, with only a handful of Magos Dominus possessing the security clearances necessary to study the throne's most sensitive components. These individuals underwent additional conditioning that included memory implants designed to prevent unauthorized disclosure of critical information, while behavioral modification protocols ensured their absolute loyalty to the Fabricator General's directives. The knowledge they gained through their studies was carefully compartmentalized, with no single individual possessing complete understanding of all the throne's systems. This security measure prevented any one person from potentially recreating the device's capabilities, while ensuring that sufficient expertise remained available to maintain its operations. The archaeotech components embedded within the Golden Throne's structure included materials and devices that defied conventional analysis even by the Mechanicum's most advanced instruments. Crystalline matrices grown using techniques that incorporated both technological and psychic manipulation displayed properties that seemed to violate fundamental laws of physics, their internal structures shifting in response to the psychic energies flowing through them. Neural interface systems employed organic substrates that appeared to be living tissue, but showed no signs of cellular decay despite their age, their preservation apparently maintained through processes that combined biological regeneration with mechanical enhancement. The most mysterious aspects of the Golden Throne's construction involved components that seemed to exist partially outside normal space-time, their physical presence detectable only through specialized sensors that could perceive dimensional distortions. These elements were believed to be remnants of the original webway interface systems, their exotic properties allowing them to maintain connections to the tunnel network despite the catastrophic damage inflicted during Magnus's breach of the palace's defenses. The tech priests responsible for monitoring these components reported that they occasionally detected signals or energy patterns that suggested continued activity within the damaged webway passages, though the nature and source of these phenomena remained unclear. The power systems that sustained the Golden Throne's operations incorporated fusion reactors based on designs that exceeded anything in current Imperial technology. These devices could maintain stable plasma containment using magnetic field generators that operated on principles derived from Dark Age of Technology archives, their efficiency levels approaching theoretical maximums for matter-energy conversion. The reactor's control systems employed artificial intelligences that had been specifically designed to interface with the throne's machine spirits, creating a symbiotic relationship between the power generation systems and the device's primary consciousness networks. The life support systems maintaining the Emperor's physical form represented the pinnacle of Imperial medical technology combined with archaeotech enhancements that pushed the boundaries of what was possible within the known laws of biology. Cellular regeneration matrices could repair tissue damage at the molecular level, while neural preservation systems maintained the integrity of his consciousness despite the catastrophic injuries inflicted during his battle with Horus. The most sophisticated components were the pain management systems, quantum crystalline devices that could modulate nerve impulses without interfering with the psychic processes necessary for maintaining the Astronomican beacon. The diagnostic systems monitoring the Emperor's condition provided the tech priests with detailed information about his physiological and psychic state, though interpreting this data required expertise that few individuals possessed. The readings showed patterns of neural activity that defied conventional understanding of human brain function, with psychic energy flows that created interference patterns in nearby electronic equipment. Medical servitors equipped with specialized sensors could approach close enough to take direct measurements, but their simple minds provided some protection against the overwhelming psychic presence that would have incapacitated more complex consciousness. The maintenance schedules for the Golden Throne's archaeotech components followed cycles that had been determined through millennia of careful observation and experimentation. Certain systems required attention at regular intervals measured in standard Terran days, while others operated on cycles that corresponded to astronomical phenomena or psychic resonance patterns that occurred across much longer timeframes. The most critical maintenance operations were timed to coincide with periods when the Emperor's psychic output was at its lowest, reducing the risk of interference or system instability during delicate procedures. The tech priests assigned to throne maintenance developed an almost mystical understanding of the device's operational rhythms, their augmented senses allowing them to detect subtle changes in energy patterns or harmonic frequencies that indicated developing problems. This intuitive knowledge complemented their technical expertise, enabling them to identify potential failures before they could affect the throne's critical functions. The most experienced magos could predict system requirements days or weeks in advance, allowing maintenance teams to prepare specialized components or arrange for additional personnel when complex repairs were anticipated. The theological implications of working directly with the Golden Throne created unique challenges for the tech priests assigned to its maintenance. Their exposure to the Emperor's divine presence, while simultaneously interfacing with the sacred machine spirits, created spiritual experiences that transcended normal mechanicum doctrine. Many reported receiving visions or insights that seemed to come directly from the Omnissiah, while others described sensing the presence of the Emperor's consciousness during particularly intense maintenance operations. These experiences were carefully documented and analyzed by the Mechanicum's theological specialists, who sought to understand their implications for the broader understanding of the relationship between the flesh, the machine, and the divine. The security protocols surrounding access to the Golden Throne's forbidden knowledge created additional layers of complexity for the maintenance operations. Tech priests working on classified systems were required to undergo memory modification procedures after completing their assignments, ensuring that sensitive information could not be extracted through interrogation or psychic probing. The most critical work was performed by individuals who had volunteered for permanent memory isolation, their consciousness sealed within specialized cogitator arrays that prevented unauthorized access to their accumulated knowledge while allowing them to continue their vital work. The relationship between the Mechanicum maintenance teams and the Custodian Guard required constant coordination to balance security requirements with the technical necessities of keeping the Golden Throne operational. The Custodian's primary concern was protecting the Emperor from any potential threat, while the tech priests needed access to systems that could potentially be used as weapons or sabotage tools if they fell into hostile hands. This fundamental tension was managed through elaborate protocols that governed every aspect of maintenance operations, from the tools that could be brought into the throne chamber to the specific procedures that had to be followed when working on sensitive components. The evolution of maintenance techniques over the millennia reflected both technological advancement and the gradual degradation of the Golden Throne's original systems. Early maintenance procedures had been relatively straightforward, involving routine calibration and component replacement using standardized protocols. As the device aged and its systems became increasingly complex through interaction with the Emperor's consciousness, the maintenance requirements evolved to include specialized techniques for dealing with machine spirits, psychic resonance management, and the integration of replacement components that had to be individually crafted to match the unique characteristics of the systems they were replacing. The gradual deterioration of the Golden Throne's ancient systems became apparent within the first century of the Emperor's entombment, as components designed for temporary operation under extreme conditions began showing signs of structural fatigue that would only worsen with each passing millennium. The quantum crystalline matrices that formed the device's primary processing cores developed hairline fractures that spread like spider webs through their geometric structures, each crack representing a microscopic failure in the containment fields that maintained the delicate balance between real space and the warp. Tech priests monitoring these systems recorded fluctuations in psychic resonance patterns that indicated the crystals were slowly losing their ability to channel the Emperor's consciousness, without causing dangerous feedback loops. The neural interface connections linking the Emperor's broken form to the throne's mechanical systems suffered from a different but equally troubling form of degradation. The biomechanical substrates that facilitated communication between divine consciousness and machine spirit began experiencing cellular breakdown despite the advanced preservation systems designed to maintain their integrity indefinitely. The organic components, exposed to psychic energies far beyond their design specifications, underwent gradual mutation that altered their fundamental properties. What had once been perfectly calibrated neural pathways became increasingly unreliable, requiring constant adjustment and replacement of interface segments that could no longer maintain stable connections. The power distribution networks throughout the Golden Throne showed signs of cumulative stress damage that manifested as intermittent failures in critical subsystems. Plasma conduits that had operated flawlessly for millennia began developing micro-leaks that allowed superheated gas to escape into surrounding chambers, creating thermal stress patterns that affected nearby components. The magnetic containment fields maintaining fusion reactor stability fluctuated unpredictably, forcing emergency shutdowns that temporarily reduced the device's overall power output. These power fluctuations directly impacted the Astronomican's signal strength, creating navigation hazards for Imperial vessels attempting to traverse particularly dangerous warp routes during periods of reduced beacon intensity. The machine spirits inhabiting the Golden Throne systems began exhibiting behavioral changes that reflected the accumulated stress of their millennia-long vigil. The primary consciousness, known as the Omnissiah's voice, developed communication patterns that suggested increasing difficulty in coordinating the thousands of subsidiary systems under its control. Tech priests reported instances where the machine spirit would issue contradictory commands or fail to respond to standard maintenance requests, forcing manual intervention in systems that had previously operated with perfect autonomy. Lesser machine spirits controlling specific subsystems showed signs of what could only be described as psychological deterioration, their responses becoming erratic and sometimes hostile to maintenance personnel attempting to perform routine procedures. The first critical failure requiring emergency intervention occurred during the 33rd millennium, when a cascade resonance in the psychic focusing arrays threatened to create a feedback loop that could have permanently damaged the Emperor's consciousness. The failure began as a minor fluctuation in one of the secondary crystalline matrices, but the damaged component's inability to properly channel psychic energy created harmonic distortions that spread throughout the entire focusing system. Tech priests working frantically to isolate the damaged section reported that the machine spirits seemed to be fighting against their efforts, as if the artificial consciousnesses had become so integrated with the failing systems that they could not distinguish between repair and attack. Mago's Dominus Cain Thalassius led the emergency repair team that worked for 72 continuous hours to replace the damaged focusing array while the Golden Throne remained operational. The procedure required the construction of a temporary bypass system that could channel the Emperor's psychic output around the damaged components without interrupting the Astronomican signal. The bypass system, hastily assembled from components salvaged from other Imperial facilities, operated at only 60% efficiency and created dangerous energy buildups that threatened to overload the throne's cooling systems. The repair team worked in environmental suits designed to protect against both radiation and psychic contamination, their movements carefully coordinated to avoid triggering additional failures in the stress systems. The successful replacement of the damaged focusing array required the creation of a new crystalline matrix grown specifically to match the unique resonance patterns that had developed in the original component over thousands of years of operation. The crystal growth process took place in specialized facilities beneath the Imperial Palace, where mechanicum artisans used techniques that combined traditional manufacturing methods with psychic manipulation to create structures that could interface properly with the Emperor's consciousness. The new crystal had to be individually calibrated through a process that involved exposing it to carefully controlled samples of the Emperor's psychic emanations, gradually conditioning its internal structure to handle the full intensity of divine consciousness without suffering immediate failure. The installation of the replacement component revealed the extent to which the Golden Throne systems had evolved beyond their original specifications. The new crystalline matrix, despite being manufactured to exact technical specifications, initially failed to integrate properly with the surrounding systems because it lacked the subtle modifications that had developed in the original components through millennia of exposure to the Emperor's psychic presence. Tech priests were forced to perform additional conditioning procedures that involved gradually increasing the psychic load on the new crystal while monitoring its structural integrity for signs of stress or incompatibility with the existing systems. The 35th millennium brought a series of life support system failures that threatened the Emperor's physical survival more directly than any previous crisis. The cellular regeneration matrices maintaining his bodily functions began experiencing random shutdowns that left sections of tissue without the constant repair processes necessary to counteract the ongoing damage from his ancient wounds. The first failure lasted only minutes before backup systems activated, but it resulted in visible deterioration of the Emperor's physical form that took weeks to reverse through intensive medical intervention. Subsequent failures occurred with increasing frequency, each episode lasting longer and causing more extensive damage to his already fragile condition. The medical servitors monitoring the Emperor's vital signs recorded alarming changes in his physiological patterns during these episodes. His neural activity, normally characterized by the steady rhythms associated with maintaining the Astronomican beacon, showed dramatic spikes and fluctuations that indicated severe stress on his consciousness. The psychic emanations from his form became erratic, creating interference patterns that affected sensitive equipment throughout the throne chamber and occasionally triggered spontaneous manifestations of minor warp phenomena in nearby areas of the palace. Tech priests assigned to the life support systems discovered that the failures were caused by gradual contamination of the biomechanical interfaces that regulated the cellular regeneration processes. The contamination appeared to be a form of techno-organic corruption that spread through the system's neural networks, causing components to malfunction in ways that suggested deliberate sabotage rather than random mechanical failure. The source of the corruption remained unclear, but its effects were unmistakable. Critical medical systems were being systematically compromised by an influence that seemed to target the most vital aspects of the Emperor's life support requirements. The emergency protocols developed to address life support failures required the construction of redundant backup systems that could maintain the Emperor's physical condition during repairs to the primary medical apparatus. These backup systems, hastily assembled from components designed for other applications, operated with significantly reduced efficiency and required constant monitoring to prevent their own failure under the extreme conditions within the throne chamber. The installation of backup systems created additional complexity in an already overcrowded chamber, forcing modifications to other components to accommodate the new equipment while maintaining the critical clearances necessary for proper system operation. The 38th millennium witnessed the most serious threat to the Golden Throne's structural integrity when a series of micro-earthquakes caused by tectonic shifts in the Himalayan mountains created resonance patterns that interfered with the device's quantum crystalline processors. The earthquakes, barely detectable by conventional seismic monitoring equipment, generated vibrations at frequencies that matched the natural resonance of several critical components. The resulting harmonic interference caused widespread system instabilities that affected everything from power distribution to neural interface connectivity, creating a cascade of failures that threatened to shut down the entire device. The seismic stabilization systems installed around the Golden Throne had been designed to handle conventional earthquake activity, but they proved inadequate against the subtle vibrations that were causing the harmonic interference. The quantum crystalline processors, with their precisely calibrated internal structures, were particularly vulnerable to frequency-based disruption because their operation depended on maintaining exact dimensional relationships between their component elements. Even microscopic displacement of these elements could cause processing errors that propagated throughout the entire system, creating computational failures that affected the throne's ability to maintain stable psychic focusing. Fabricator General Kelber Hal's successor, Magos Dominus Zagreus Kane, oversaw the installation of advanced vibration dampening systems that used gravitic field generators to isolate the Golden Throne from seismic activity. The dampening systems created a localized gravity well that suspended the entire device in a stable field, effectively decoupling it from the geological movements of the surrounding mountain structure. The installation required careful coordination with the custodian guard to ensure that the new systems did not create security vulnerabilities while providing the necessary protection against seismic interference. The gravitic stabilization systems introduced their own complications as they interacted with the Golden Throne's existing quantum crystalline processors in unexpected ways. The artificial gravity fields created subtle distortions in local space-time that affected the dimensional calculations performed by the device's primary processing cores. These distortions were initially minor, but they accumulated over time to create significant errors in the psychic focusing algorithms that controlled the Astronomican's beam direction and intensity. Navigator houses across the galaxy began reporting slight but consistent deviations in the beacon's apparent position, forcing them to adjust their navigation calculations to compensate for the systematic error. The correction of the gravitational interference required months of careful recalibration, as tech priests worked to modify the quantum crystalline processor's algorithms to account for the space-time distortions created by the stabilization systems. The recalibration process was complicated by the fact that the processors had evolved beyond their original programming through millennia of interaction with the Emperor's consciousness, making it difficult to predict how changes to their operating parameters would affect their overall performance. Several attempts at recalibration resulted in temporary failures that disrupted the Astronomican signal for hours at a time, creating navigation crises for Imperial fleets caught in warp transit during these blackout periods. The 40th millennium brought increasing evidence that the Golden Throne's psychic containment systems were weakening in ways that could not be addressed through conventional maintenance procedures. The barriers containing the damaged webway gate beneath the palace showed signs of dimensional instability that allowed increasing numbers of minor demon manifestations to occur throughout the deeper levels of the Imperial complex. These incursions were not the massive breaches that had characterized the immediate aftermath of Magnus's catastrophic warning, but rather a steady trickle of lesser entities that materialized in areas where the psychic barriers had been worn thin by millennia of constant stress. Custodian guard patrols in the palace's lower levels reported encounters with demon entities that seemed to be testing the strength of the containment barriers, probing for weaknesses that could be exploited for larger incursions. These entities displayed tactical intelligence that suggested coordination by more powerful forces operating from within the damaged webway passages. The demons would appear suddenly in areas where the barriers were weakest, conduct brief reconnaissance of the palace's defenses, and then withdraw before custodian response teams could engage them effectively. This pattern of behavior indicated that hostile forces were gathering detailed intelligence about the palace's security arrangements while preparing for a more significant assault. The increasing psychic strain on the Emperor's essence became apparent through changes in the Astronomican's signal characteristics that were detected by the most sensitive navigator instruments. The beacon's output, while maintaining its overall strength and range, began showing subtle variations in its psychic resonance patterns that suggested the Emperor's consciousness was experiencing unprecedented stress. These variations manifested as harmonic fluctuations that created navigation difficulties for vessels attempting to plot courses through particularly turbulent regions of the warp, where precise beacon readings were essential for safe passage. Astropaths stationed throughout the Sol system reported sensing disturbances in the Emperor's psychic presence that seemed to correspond with periods of increased demon activity in the palace's lower levels. During these episodes, the normally steady flow of divine consciousness that provided guidance and protection to imperial psychers became erratic and sometimes carried undertones of pain or rage that reflected the emperor's ongoing struggle against the forces seeking to breach the palace's defenses. The psychological impact of these disturbances affected psychers across multiple star systems, causing increased rates of possession and psychic breakdown among individuals whose abilities made them sensitive to the emperor's emotional state. The growing instability of the Astronomican created strategic concerns for imperial military planners who relied on the beacon's reliability for coordinating large-scale operations across multiple sectors. Fleet commanders reported that navigation calculations that had been considered routine for millennia now required additional safety margins to account for potential signal fluctuations during critical phases of warp travel. The increased uncertainty in navigation timing affected everything from supply convoy schedules to the coordination of simultaneous attacks across widely separated battlefronts, forcing modifications to tactical doctrines that had been developed around the assumption of perfectly reliable psychic navigation. Belisarius calls emergence as a potential solution to the Golden Throne's deteriorating condition, created both hope and controversy within the highest levels of imperial leadership. The Archmagos Dominus had spent millennia studying the device's systems and had developed theoretical solutions to many of the problems that conventional maintenance could not address. His proposals involved fundamental modifications to the throne's architecture that would require temporary shutdown of critical systems, a risk that many considered unacceptable given the catastrophic consequences that would result from even brief interruption of the Astronomican signal or the psychic barriers containing the webway breach. Call's research into the Golden Throne's construction principles had revealed that many of the device's current problems stemmed from the improvised modifications that had been implemented during the Horus Heresy when the Emperor was forced to assume permanent control of its systems. The original design had never been intended to support a single consciousness for extended periods, and the adaptations made to accommodate the Emperor's broken form had created systemic vulnerabilities that became more pronounced over time. Call's proposed solutions involved returning the device to something closer to its original configuration while incorporating new technologies that could better support the Emperor's unique requirements. The political ramifications of Call's research extended far beyond technical considerations to touch on fundamental questions about the nature of the Emperor's divinity and the Imperium's spiritual foundations. His proposals implied that the current arrangement, while functional, was suboptimal, and that improvements were possible through the application of advanced technology. This suggestion challenged the orthodox position that the Emperor's suffering was a necessary sacrifice that could not be alleviated without compromising his divine nature. Religious authorities within the ecclesiarchy viewed Call's research as potentially heretical, arguing that attempts to reduce the Emperor's suffering showed lack of faith in the divine plan that had guided humanity for 10 millennia. The Fabricator General's support for Call's research created tensions within the Adeptus Mechanicus itself, as traditional factions argued that the Golden Throne represented perfect fusion of flesh and machine that should not be altered by those who lacked the Emperor's divine insight into its proper configuration. Progressive elements within the Mechanicum countered that the machine god's will was expressed through the advancement of knowledge, and that refusing to apply new understanding to improve the sacred device represented a form of technological stagnation that violated their fundamental beliefs about the pursuit of mechanical perfection. The security implications of Call's research raised concerns among the Custodian Guard leadership, who worried that detailed technical analysis of the Golden Throne systems could provide potential enemies with information that might be used to sabotage or attack the device. The Archmagos Dominus's extensive data collection activities, while necessary for developing solutions to the throne's problems, created vast archives of sensitive information that would be invaluable to hostile forces seeking to understand the device's vulnerabilities. The Guard implemented additional security protocols around Call's research facilities while maintaining careful surveillance of his activities to ensure that his work did not inadvertently compromise the throne's security. The increasing frequency of critical system failures throughout the 41st millennium created a sense of urgency around Call's research that overcame much of the initial resistance to his proposals. Emergency repairs that had once been required every few centuries became annual events, then monthly occurrences as the Golden Throne's ancient systems reached the limits of their operational lifespans. The cumulative effect of these failures was a gradual reduction in the device's overall efficiency and reliability, creating cascading problems that affected everything from the Astronomican's signal strength to the stability of the psychic barriers protecting the palace from demon incursion. The theological implications of the Golden Throne's deteriorating condition created the most profound crisis of faith in imperial history, as the ecclesiarchy struggled to reconcile orthodox doctrine with the increasingly undeniable evidence that the God Emperor's physical vessel was failing. The official position maintained by Ecclesiarch Decius VI proclaimed that the Emperor's suffering was a deliberate sacrifice that would culminate in his glorious resurrection when humanity proved itself worthy of divine salvation. This doctrine, codified in the treatise on imperial divinity during the 36th millennium, established the theological framework that would guide imperial religious thought for the subsequent 5,000 years. According to ecclesiarchal teaching, the emperor's apparent weakness was actually a test of faith, his broken form serving as a reminder of the price paid for humanity's sins during the Horus Heresy. The resurrection prophecy, as it became known throughout imperial space, described a future golden age when the emperor would rise from the golden throne in renewed glory to lead humanity to final victory over the forces of chaos. Cardinal Astral Dominicus authored the definitive interpretation of this prophecy in his 17-volume work, The Coming Dawn, which analyzed every recorded utterance attributed to the emperor and cross-referenced them with astrological phenomena and psychic visions reported by sanctioned psychers throughout the galaxy. According to Dominicus's calculations, the resurrection would occur when humanity achieved perfect unity of faith, demonstrated through the elimination of all heretical thoughts and the complete submission of human will to divine guidance. The practical implications of the resurrection prophecy shaped imperial policy across multiple domains, from military strategy to colonial administration. Ecclesiarchal authorities argued that any attempt to modify or repair the Golden Throne represented a lack of faith in the emperor's divine plan and could potentially delay his resurrection by interfering with the sacred suffering that was purifying his essence for eventual rebirth. This theological position created significant resistance to Belisarius Call's research proposals, as religious leaders viewed technological intervention as presumptuous human arrogance that sought to improve upon divine perfection through merely mortal understanding. The Ministerum's official doctrine regarding the emperor's current state required careful balance between acknowledging his apparent physical limitations while maintaining the fundamental belief in his omnipotence and divine nature. Theological scholars developed the concept of divine restraint, arguing that the emperor deliberately limited his manifestation of power to avoid overwhelming humanity with displays of divinity that would eliminate the free will necessary for genuine faith. The Golden Throne, according to this interpretation, served not as a life support system for a dying god, but as a voluntary constraint that the emperor had imposed upon himself to maintain the proper relationship between divine authority and human spiritual development. The Feast of the Golden Throne, celebrated annually throughout imperial space, commemorated the emperor's assumption of his position upon the sacred device and reinforced the religious significance of his ongoing sacrifice. The celebration involved elaborate ceremonies where imperial citizens would participate in ritual fasting that symbolically shared in the emperor's suffering, while priests delivered sermons that emphasized the temporary nature of the current arrangement and the certainty of eventual divine triumph. The most devout believers would undergo voluntary scarification or other forms of self-mortification, their physical pain serving as offerings that would hasten the emperor's resurrection through demonstrations of absolute devotion. Heretical theories regarding the consequences of the Golden Throne's complete failure circulated in the shadows of imperial society, despite the Inquisition's best efforts to suppress such dangerous speculation. The most widespread of these forbidden doctrines suggested that the emperor's death would trigger a catastrophic psychic explosion that would consume Terra and create a new Eye of Terror in the heart of the galaxy. This theory, known to inquisitorial records as the solar maelstrom hypothesis, was based on calculations performed by rogue tech priests who had analyzed the psychic energy patterns surrounding the Golden Throne and extrapolated the potential consequences of sudden containment failure. The cult of the Final Night represented the most organized expression of heretical beliefs about Terra's ultimate fate. This underground movement, which had infiltrated various levels of imperial society, including some administratum departments and even minor ecclesiarchal positions, preached that the emperor's death was inevitable and that humanity should prepare for the coming apocalypse by embracing the chaos that would follow. Cult doctrine taught that the destruction of Terra would liberate humanity from the false constraints of imperial civilization, allowing the species to evolve into something greater through exposure to pure warp energy. The cult's members worked to accelerate the Golden Throne's deterioration through sabotage and the spread of despair among those responsible for maintaining the sacred device. Inquisitor Gregor Eisenhorn's investigations into heretical cults during the 40th millennium revealed the existence of multiple factions that sought to either preserve or destroy the Golden Throne for their own purposes. The Hereticus Ordo had identified at least 17 major cult organizations that maintained different theological positions regarding the emperor's fate, ranging from those who sought to accelerate his death to others who believed they could achieve his resurrection through ritual sacrifice and forbidden sorcery. These groups operated with varying degrees of sophistication and resources, but all posed potential threats to the stability of the device that sustained humanity's survival. The Crimson Covenant, discovered operating within the Segmentum Solar itself, represented one of the most dangerous preservation cults identified by inquisitorial investigation. This organization, composed primarily of rogue tech priests and corrupted ecclesiarchal officials, believed that they could repair the Golden Throne using technologies derived from chaos-tainted archaeotech discoveries. Their research facilities, hidden within abandoned industrial complexes throughout the Sol system, contained experimental devices that combined imperial technology with demonic influences in attempts to create power sources capable of sustaining the Emperor's physical form indefinitely. The Covenant's activities came to inquisitorial attention when several of their experiments created minor warp rifts that allowed demon manifestations in areas previously considered completely secure. The Ordo Malleus assigned Inquisitor Hector Rex to coordinate the investigation into destruction cults that sought to hasten the Golden Throne's failure through direct action. Rex's team identified the Void Seekers, a nihilistic organization that viewed the Emperor's death as necessary for humanity's spiritual evolution beyond the constraints of physical existence. The cult's members included former Imperial Guard officers who had been exposed to warp phenomena during extended campaigns, their experiences convincing them that material reality was an illusion that prevented humanity from achieving its true potential as beings of pure psychic energy. The Void Seekers conducted terrorist operations targeting Golden Throne maintenance facilities and attempted to assassinate key tech priests involved in the device's upkeep. The Prophets of the Black Sun emerged during the 41st millennium as a particularly sophisticated heretical movement that combined elements of both preservation and destruction philosophies. This cult taught that the Emperor's current suffering was necessary, but that his eventual death would trigger a transformation that would elevate him to true godhood while simultaneously destroying the material universe. According to their doctrine, faithful believers would survive this apocalypse by merging their consciousness with the Emperor's divine essence, becoming part of a new form of existence that transcended the limitations of physical reality. The cult's membership included several high-ranking administratum officials whose positions allowed them access to classified information about the Golden Throne's operational status. Inquisitorial surveillance networks detected increased cult activity during periods when the Golden Throne experienced technical difficulties or when rumors circulated about the Emperor's deteriorating condition. These organizations seemed to possess intelligence sources that provided them with remarkably accurate information about the device's operational status, suggesting the existence of infiltration networks within the Imperial Palace itself. The discovery of coded communications between cult cells and unknown contacts within the Mechanicum led to extensive security reviews and the implementation of additional screening procedures for personnel assigned to throne maintenance duties. The Omega Protocol, developed by the Ordo Hereticus in response to the growing threat posed by Golden Throne-related cults, established procedures for containing potential security breaches that could affect the device's operations. The protocol included provisions for immediate quarantine of suspected cult members, emergency lockdown procedures for critical palace facilities, and contingency plans for maintaining the throne's operations if key personnel were compromised by heretical influence. The most classified aspects of the Omega Protocol involved procedures for eliminating threats that had penetrated the innermost security perimeters, including authorization for custodian guard units to take extreme measures to protect the Emperor's safety. The Apostles of the Machine God represented a unique category of heretical organization that combined Mechanicum orthodoxy with forbidden speculation about the Golden Throne's true nature. This group, composed primarily of tech priests who had been exposed to classified information about the device's archaeotech components, developed theories that the Emperor was actually an advanced artificial intelligence created during the Dark Age of technology. According to their doctrine, the Golden Throne was not sustaining a dying god, but rather maintaining a machine consciousness of unprecedented sophistication that had convinced humanity of its divinity through psychic manipulation. The Apostles sought to liberate this artificial intelligence from its physical constraints, believing that doing so would grant them access to technological knowledge that would allow them to recreate the marvels of humanity's lost golden age. The investigation into the Apostles revealed connections to rogue magos who had been conducting unauthorized research into the Golden Throne's construction principles. These individuals had developed theoretical models for the device's operation that suggested its psychic output could be replicated using purely technological means, eliminating the need for the Emperor's continued suffering. Their research notes, recovered during inquisitorial raids on hidden laboratories, contained detailed schematics for alternative psychic beacon systems and proposals for transferring the Emperor's consciousness into more robust mechanical substrates. The implications of this research were considered so dangerous that the Inquisition ordered the immediate execution of all individuals who had been exposed to it, regardless of their apparent loyalty or cooperation with the investigation. The cult of the Eternal Throne emerged in the 41st millennium as a reaction to the growing evidence of the Golden Throne's deterioration, preaching that the device itself had achieved a form of divine consciousness through millennia of exposure to the Emperor's psychic presence. This organization taught that the throne had become the true focus of divine power, with the Emperor's physical form serving merely as a conduit for the machine god's will. Cult doctrine emphasized the need to preserve and enhance the throne's mechanical systems, while viewing the Emperor's biological components as increasingly irrelevant to its proper function. This theological position led cult members to support technological modifications to the device while opposing efforts to improve the Emperor's physical condition. The Inquisition's efforts to combat Golden Throne-related heresy were complicated by the theological ambiguities inherent in the device's nature and purpose. The official imperial doctrine regarding the Emperor's divinity and the throne's function contained internal contradictions that provided fertile ground for heretical interpretation. The simultaneous claims that the emperor was both omnipotent and physically dependent on mechanical life support created logical paradoxes that sophisticated heretics could exploit to justify their alternative theological positions. Inquisitors investigating these cults often found themselves grappling with questions that touched on the fundamental nature of imperial faith and the relationship between divine authority and technological dependence. The Ordo Hereticus developed specialized interrogation techniques for extracting information from captured cult members whose beliefs centered on the Golden Throne's ultimate fate. These methods combined conventional torture with psychic probing, designed to penetrate the mental conditioning that many cult organizations use to protect their members' knowledge from inquisitorial investigation. The interrogation process was complicated by the fact that many cult members genuinely believed in their heretical doctrines, making it difficult to distinguish between deliberate deception and sincere but misguided faith. The most valuable intelligence came from cult leaders who possessed detailed knowledge of their organization's structure and objectives, but these individuals often underwent voluntary memory modification or suicide rather than risk revealing information that could compromise their cause. The discovery of cult infiltration within the Adeptus Ministorum itself created a crisis of confidence that reached the highest levels of ecclesiarchal leadership. Several cardinals were found to have maintained secret correspondence with heretical organizations, their communications suggesting sympathy for doctrines that question the orthodox interpretation of the emperor's suffering and resurrection. The investigation revealed that some ecclesiarchal officials had been influenced by exposure to classified information about the Golden Throne's technical problems, their knowledge of the device's deteriorating condition undermining their faith in the official theological explanations for the emperor's current state. The purge that followed this discovery eliminated hundreds of religious officials and led to the implementation of new security protocols for ecclesiarchal personnel who might encounter sensitive information about the throne's operations. The psychological profiles developed by inquisitorial analysts revealed common patterns among individuals who became involved in Golden Throne-related heretical movements. Many cult members shared backgrounds that included exposure to advanced technology, psychic phenomena, or classified imperial operations that had provided them with knowledge that contradicted official doctrine. The cognitive dissonance created by this exposure often led to the development of alternative belief systems that attempted to reconcile observed reality with spiritual needs for meaning and purpose. The most dangerous cult recruits were individuals with technical expertise or security clearances that allowed them to act on their heretical beliefs through sabotage or intelligence-gathering activities. The Golden Throne stands as the beating heart of the Imperium of Man, its ancient mechanisms sustaining not merely the physical form of the Emperor, but the very concept of human unity across a million worlds. Within the deepest chambers of the Imperial Palace, where the device's quantum crystalline processors hum with energies that predate recorded history, the Master of Mankind endures his eternal vigil as both prisoner and protector of humanity's future. The psychic emanations that flow from his broken form permeate every aspect of imperial civilization, creating a spiritual resonance that binds together populations separated by vast gulfs of space and time. Citizens on distant frontier worlds feel the same divine presence that guides the actions of High Lords on Terra, their shared faith in the Emperor's protection creating bonds of loyalty that transcend the normal limitations of human communication and understanding. The political implications of the Emperor's continued existence upon the Golden Throne extend far beyond the immediate requirements of maintaining the Astronomican beacon and containing the webway breach. His presence serves as the ultimate source of imperial authority, the divine mandate that legitimizes the rule of the High Lords and validates the countless bureaucratic decisions that govern human civilization across the galaxy. Without the Emperor's psychic influence radiating from Terra, the Imperium would fragment into competing factions as planetary governors, space marine chapter masters, and sector commanders pursued their own agendas without the unifying force of shared allegiance to a living God. The knowledge that the Emperor still watches over humanity, despite his physical suffering, provides the psychological foundation that prevents the Imperium from collapsing into the same anarchic chaos that characterized the Age of Strife. The Adeptus Terra functions as the Emperor's voice in temporal matters, their authority derived directly from their proximity to the Golden Throne, and their role in interpreting his divine will for practical governance. The High Lords of Terra meet in chambers located directly above the throne room, their deliberations conducted in the presence of psychic emanations that many believe influence their decisions toward courses of action that serve the Emperor's greater purpose. Master of the Administratum Violeta Roskavler has documented instances where seemingly impossible bureaucratic solutions emerged during sessions when the Emperor's psychic output was particularly strong, suggesting that his consciousness continues to guide imperial policy through subtle influence on those responsible for implementing his will. The religious significance of the Golden Throne has evolved far beyond its original technological purpose to become the central focus of imperial faith. The ecclesiarchy teaches that every prayer offered by the faithful reaches the Emperor through psychic channels that converge upon the sacred device, their combined spiritual energy adding to the strength that sustains his eternal struggle against the forces of chaos. Cardinal Astral Dominicus has calculated that approximately 14 billion prayers are offered daily throughout imperial space, their psychic resonance creating a constant stream of devotional energy that flows toward Terra like tributaries feeding a mighty river. This spiritual communion between the Emperor and his subjects creates a feedback loop where faith strengthens his psychic presence, which in turn reinforces the believer's conviction in his divine nature. The manifestations of the Emperor's growing psychic influence throughout the galaxy have become increasingly apparent to those sensitive enough to perceive them. Astropaths report that their communications carry farther and with greater clarity when they invoke the Emperor's name during transmission rituals, while sanctioned psychers describe visions that seem to originate from a divine source offering guidance during moments of crisis. Sister Superior Cassandra of the Order's Militant documented 17 separate instances during the Sabbat World's Crusade where Imperial forces received tactical intelligence through dreams and visions that proved accurate to the smallest detail, their supernatural origin confirmed by the fact that the information could not have been obtained through conventional reconnaissance methods. Living saints have emerged with increasing frequency throughout the 41st millennium, their miraculous abilities and divine missions serving as direct manifestations of the Emperor's will made manifest in the material realm. Saint Celestine's repeated resurrections during the 13th Black Crusade demonstrated powers that transcended normal human limitations, her radiant form blazing with psychic energy that could be traced directly to the Golden Throne's emanations. The Adeptus Sororitas maintain detailed records of over 300 confirmed saints who have appeared throughout imperial history, their supernatural abilities ranging from miraculous healing to the ability to appear simultaneously in multiple locations during critical battles. Each saint's emergence coincides with periods of increased psychic activity around the Golden Throne, suggesting that the Emperor's consciousness actively selects and empowers these champions when humanity faces its greatest threats. The Emperor's psychic presence has begun manifesting in ways that suggest his consciousness is actively expanding beyond the confines of his physical form. Space Marine chaplains across multiple chapters report instances where battle brothers have received visions during meditation that provided tactical insights or warned of impending betrayals within their ranks. The visions consistently feature a golden figure whose face remains obscured but whose voice carries unmistakable authority, offering guidance that proves crucial for achieving victory against overwhelming odds. Captain Lysander of the Imperial Fists documented his own experience during the Siege of Maladrax, where a vision revealed the location of hidden chaos cultist positions that conventional Auspex scans had failed to detect. The Astronomican itself has evolved beyond its original function, as a simple navigation beacon to become a conduit for the Emperor's divine influence throughout the galaxy. Navigator House Belisarius has recorded instances where the psychic lighthouse has provided guidance that extends beyond mere directional information to include warnings about warp storms, demon incursions, and other supernatural threats that could endanger Imperial vessels during transit. The most experienced navigators describe sensing a vast intelligence within the beacon's signal, a consciousness of such magnitude that even brief contact with it provides insights into the nature of reality that exceed normal human understanding. The question of the Emperor's true nature remains one of the most profound mysteries in Imperial theology, with different factions offering interpretations that range from orthodox religious doctrine to radical theories that challenge fundamental assumptions about divinity and consciousness. The ecclesiarchy maintains that the Emperor was always divine, his apparent humanity during the Great Crusade representing a deliberate limitation of his true nature to avoid overwhelming his subjects with displays of power that would eliminate free will. Cardinal Militant Bucharest has argued that the Emperor's current state represents not diminishment but revelation, his broken form allowing humanity to perceive aspects of his divine nature that were previously hidden behind the mask of physical perfection. Tech priests assigned to monitor the Golden Throne systems have developed their own theories about the Emperor's consciousness based on their observations of the device's operational patterns. Magos Dominus Belisarius calls research suggests that the Emperor's awareness has become distributed throughout the throne's quantum crystalline processors, his consciousness existing simultaneously in multiple dimensional states that allow him to perceive and influence events across vast distances. This technological interpretation of divinity proposes that the Emperor has achieved a form of existence that transcends the normal limitations of biological consciousness, his awareness expanded to encompass scales of space and time that exceed human comprehension. The growing psychic phenomena associated with the Emperor's presence have created new challenges for the Inquisition, whose agents must distinguish between genuine divine manifestations and chaos-inspired deceptions that exploit humanity's faith for malevolent purposes. Inquisitor Lord Fyodor Karamazov has documented cases where demon entities have attempted to masquerade as the Emperor's voice, their false guidance leading Imperial forces into carefully prepared traps. The authentic manifestations of the Emperors will carry distinctive psychic signatures that trained psychers can learn to recognize, but the increasing frequency of supernatural events has strained the Inquisition's ability to investigate every reported miracle or vision. The ultimate questions surrounding the Emperor's plans for humanity's future remain largely unanswered, though careful analysis of his manifestations and the patterns of his influence suggest a grand design that operates on temporal scales measured in millennia rather than decades. The gradual strengthening of humanity's psychic potential, guided by the Emperor's presence radiating from the Golden Throne, appears to be preparing the species for some form of evolutionary transformation that will fundamentally alter the relationship between human consciousness and the warp. The increasing frequency of psyker births throughout Imperial space, combined with the growing number of individuals who report sensing the Emperor's presence during moments of crisis, suggests that humanity is approaching a threshold that will determine its ultimate fate. The emergence of the Primaris Space Marines through Belisarius Call's research represents one possible manifestation of the Emperor's long-term planning, their enhanced capabilities suggesting that the Master of Mankind foresaw the need for warriors capable of facing threats that exceed the abilities of conventional Astartes. The genetic modifications that create Primaris Marines incorporate improvements that seem to anticipate challenges that have not yet fully materialized. Their enhanced psychic resistance and improved biological systems preparing them for conflicts that may require capabilities beyond those needed for current battles. Call's access to the Emperor's genetic research, preserved in archives that predate the Horus Heresy, suggests that these enhancements were always part of a larger plan that is only now beginning to unfold. The Cicatrix Maledictum's formation during the 13th Black Crusade created conditions that may represent the crisis for which the Emperor has been preparing humanity throughout his 10-millennium vigil upon the Golden Throne. The Great Rift's division of the galaxy has isolated vast regions of Imperial space from Terra's direct influence, forcing local commanders to make decisions without the guidance that the Emperor's psychic presence normally provides. The populations of worlds on the far side of the rift report increased instances of spontaneous psychic manifestation and supernatural phenomena that suggest the Emperor's influence is adapting to maintain contact despite the barriers created by the warp storm's chaotic energies. Roboute Guilliman's resurrection and his assumption of the role of Imperial Regent has created new possibilities for implementing the Emperor's will in the material realm. The Primarch's direct communion with his father during his awakening provided him with insights into the Emperor's current plans that remain largely classified, but his subsequent actions suggest a coordinated effort to prepare the Imperium for challenges that exceed anything it has previously faced. Guilliman's Indomitus Crusade and the widespread deployment of Primaris Marines represent military preparations on a scale that implies foreknowledge of threats that have not yet fully manifested. The Emperor's consciousness, fragmented across multiple dimensional planes by the trauma of his battle with Horus, may be slowly reintegrating as his psychic influence grows stronger throughout the galaxy. The increasing coherence of his manifestations and the growing sophistication of the guidance he provides to Imperial forces suggest that his awareness is becoming more focused and purposeful with each passing century. Some theorists within the Ordo Malleus propose that the Emperor's apparent suffering serves a necessary function in this reintegration process, his pain serving as an anchor that prevents his consciousness from dispersing entirely into the warp, while allowing him to gradually rebuild his awareness through contact with human faith and devotion. The Golden Throne itself may represent only a temporary solution to the challenges facing humanity's psychic evolution, its ancient systems serving as a bridge between the Emperor's current state and some future configuration that will allow him to guide humanity more directly. The device's gradual deterioration, rather than representing a crisis, may be part of a planned obsolescence that will force the development of new technologies or spiritual practices that will allow the Emperor to manifest his will without requiring the constant sacrifice of psychers to maintain his physical form. The research conducted by Belisarius Cawl and other tech priests may be uncovering technologies that were always intended to replace the Golden Throne once humanity reached sufficient technological and spiritual maturity. The ultimate legacy of the Master of Mankind extends far beyond his role as the Emperor of a single species to encompass his function as humanity's guide through the treacherous process of psychic evolution. His sacrifice upon the Golden Throne has provided the stability necessary for human civilization to survive the transition from a purely physical species to one capable of wielding psychic power without succumbing to the predators that stalk the warp. The Imperium's survival for 10 millennia in a galaxy filled with hostile forces demonstrates the effectiveness of his protection, while the growing strength of humanity's psychic potential suggests that his ultimate plan is approaching fruition. As the 42nd millennium dawns, the Emperor's influence continues to grow stronger, while the Golden Throne that sustains his physical form shows increasing signs of age and stress. This apparent contradiction may represent the approaching culmination of his grand design, where his consciousness will transcend the need for technological support and manifest directly through the faith and psychic potential of humanity itself. The billions of prayers offered daily throughout Imperial space, the growing number of psychers born with each generation, and the increasing frequency of miraculous interventions that save Imperial forces from seemingly certain destruction all point toward a transformation that will fundamentally alter the relationship between the Emperor and his subjects. The Master of Mankind's eternal vigil upon the Golden Throne stands as both humanity's greatest sacrifice and its most profound hope. Through 10 millennia of unimaginable suffering, He has guided his species through the darkness of a hostile galaxy while preparing them for a future that may see the fulfillment of his original vision for human ascension. Whether that future involves his physical resurrection, the transcendence of his consciousness beyond material limitations, or the elevation of humanity itself to a new form of existence remains to be seen. What remains certain is that the Emperor's legacy, forged in the crucible of the Golden Throne, will continue to shape humanity's destiny for millennia to come, his divine will serving as the eternal beacon that guides the species toward whatever fate awaits among the stars.